I've always been a romantic. Always believed in true love. Always thought, hoped, wished, dreamed that somewhere out there was the perfect woman for me. Call her my missing piece, my other half, my soulmate, whatever you want to call her. I always knew that one day I would find her, or she would find me, and together we'd live our own happily ever after. And I thought we had found each other. I thought my dreams had come true, until... This is hard to write, and I know some people will probably laugh at me about the whole thing, if they believe me at all. But what happened, what's still happening, is all too real and all too close to me. Okay, I guess there's nothing to do but explain what has gone on. Maybe it'll help warn someone else. Maybe someone can help me. Maybe it'll be nothing more than an entertaining tale. But I have to do it anyway. I met her online. On Reddit, in fact. I won't mention which sub, but suffice to say, it was a relationship sub of sorts. One for lonely people looking to talk to each other. You see, despite my belief in love and romance and soulmates, I've always been shy around women. Scared to make the first move because I always worry that I'm wrong, that there's no interest in me, or that if there is, I'm going to screw it up somehow. I've also always been nervous because of my looks. I'm not attractive. At least I've never thought of myself as such. I've had a few in-person relationships, but they failed for various reasons. That's what drove me to write a post about looking for someone to talk to and see how it went. I got a few answers, but nothing really major until she answered. Chelsea. Right from the first few messages we exchanged, everything clicked. Everything felt right. Our interests aligned in many ways, and where they didn't, they complemented each other's. Our conversation, first through messages on Reddit and soon on a messaging app, was free and easy and relaxed, like we'd known each other for years. We shred our secrets, our regrets, our insecurities, everything. The chemistry was immediate and potent. We even agreed to kiss our phone screens at night to share a goodnight kiss. Things moved rapidly as we both recognized early on that this was a person we already liked and could love. We both confessed pretty early on that we had fallen for the other. Our messages got more and more deep and romantic, as well as intense and sexual. But we still could talk about ordinary, everyday things and feel just as excited about them. Everything moved fast, and before either of us knew it, we were in what we considered a real and deep relationship. We messaged all throughout every day, called every chance we got, video chatted as often as possible. We exchanged pictures, videos, memes, songs, poetry, everything. And it was amazing. We both said it was the happiest and healthiest relationship we'd ever been in. If we had an issue, we talked about it and worked through it. If one of us had a bad day and struggled with mental health issues, the other was right there to pick up the pieces and help things get back on track. I never knew it could be so good. We were in love and determined that we had a future, one that included marriage and being together forever. Then, one Thursday evening, a little more than a year after we had started talking, we said our goodnights as usual. Things had been a little strained the last few weeks because she had suddenly received notice from her landlord that she had to move, and the stress of that and time it took were hard, but we had had a really good day and talked about things, and I felt like we were back in a good place when I went to bed. I woke up, excited as always to see if she had messaged me already or if I had beaten her to it. There was nothing there, so I said good morning and included some mushy thoughts about how I wished I was waking up next to her. Then I got ready for the day. Before I left my apartment, I checked and saw there was still no message, which was unusual, but I thought that she had probably been called into work early and hadn't had time to send anything back yet. I went about my day, checking the app periodically, only to still not receive anything. As the day wore on, I got more and more worried, as this was completely unlike her. She always messaged back, even if it was just to say that she was busy and we would talk later. I tried calling but got no answer. As it got later in the day, I got even more worried. When it was bedtime and I still wasn't getting any responses or answers, I worked myself into a panic attack. No sleep that night, but also no messages. The entire weekend was like that. I didn't hear anything from her Saturday or Sunday, and when I called her phone, it just rang and never went to voicemail. I started scouring online, trying to find reports of traffic accidents or violent incidents of any kind in her area, but nothing. I didn't sleep much at all, and by matinee morning, I was so worn out and so worried that I genuinely thought I would have to go to the hospital. That's when I finally got a message from her. It was just a simple, "Good morning, I hope you slept well." Like nothing had happened, like we'd been talking all weekend. The relief I felt was immense, and I guess that's why I didn't notice anything off at first. I immediately messaged her back, and soon we were messaging again like normal, though she never said what had been going on over the weekend to cause her to not respond. Any time I tried to bring it up, she deflected. That should have been a warning sign, but at the time, I was still too relieved that she was okay to take too much notice. The rest of the day continued like that, messaging back and forth, but something felt different, off, wrong even. It took me a little while to notice it, and I tried to chalk it up to something residual from whatever had kept her away all weekend, but it was definitely there. There was a stilted feel to her messages and to our conversations, instead of the usual easy flow. It almost felt like she was being very deliberate in what she was saying, or like she had forgotten her normal patterns and was trying to remember what she should sound like. That feeling only got more intense when we finally talked on the phone. It was just a quick call after she was off work, but it was obvious something was different. She spoke haltingly, pausing a lot between words or phrases, and had very little emotion in her voice. And beyond that, there was a subtle quality to her voice and speech, something I couldn't identify but that made me feel uneasy, uncomfortable, suspicious, maybe all of the above. It was her, but it wasn't her. I still tried to chalk it up to getting over the weekend, but for the first time ever, I was glad to get off the phone with her and say goodnight. Over the next few days, the feelings I had got even stronger. Things weren't the same. She wasn't the same. She was trying very hard to act like everything was normal, but I knew her too well to be fooled completely. And beyond the subtle changes in voice and speech patterns, there were other things. This is the part where I know I'll sound crazy if I haven't already crossed that point. I started to, see things and hear things. Little things at first, nothing major, but enough to raise the hairs on the back of my neck. At first, it was just a feeling of being watched, of someone looking at me or standing near me, but just out of sight. It was worse when I was talking to her, but soon I had that feeling all the time. Then I started to hear things. The sound of soft footsteps behind me when I went out to my car, a scrambling sound like an animal walking through leaves, a light giggle from right outside my window, even my name being called when I was at the store when there was no one around to call it. I tried to ignore all of this, telling myself it was my imagination and stress and anxiety teaming up to do a number on me. But I couldn't ignore the fact that it all started after her missing weekend and got worse at about the same rate as our conversations did. After a few days, I couldn't deny anymore that something was wrong. Our conversations had become even more disjointed, stilted, awkward, and finally, more than a little creepy. It seemed like everything she said was taken from something she had said before, like she was going back through our messages and pulling parts of them out to answer me, with no new information or words. Talking on the phone was worse. Her voice started to send shivers up my spine while I listened to her try to sound like herself, trying to fake it. Worst of all were the video chats. Her face and body still looked the same, but there was something in her eyes, something that felt wrong, so wrong. The way she looked at me, it more than worried me, it scared me. Whoever, whatever was looking at me, it wasn't her. Not anymore. After a couple of video chats, I couldn't do it anymore. I lied and told her that my phone camera was broken and I couldn't video chat. She didn't seem too disturbed on the surface, but I noticed afterwards that the incidence of hearing things increased. It seemed like every few minutes I was hearing the sounds of someone or something that just wasn't there. That's when I started to see her. Glimpses, flashes, at the store, when I went out to eat, at the park, even out of the corner of my eye at home through a window. At first, I wasn't sure, told myself it couldn't be. She lived in another state, and she would for sure tell me if she had come to visit. And if she had come to visit, she wouldn't be playing these peekaboo games. But it started happening too often to not be true, to not be real. I was walking to my car to go to a friend's house for a game night, and I happened to glance across the street and caught a full view of her. I knew it was her instantly. The same curly brown hair, the same figure, same everything. But instead of feeling excited and happy at seeing her, my stomach turned. That sense of wrongness, of something being off, washed over me, flooded me. Before I really knew what was happening, I was in my car and screeching my tires on my way out of the parking lot. As I glanced behind me, I saw her scrambling on all fours into the middle of the road before standing up and staring after me. I almost crashed when she dropped back down and started to crawl towards me, but thankfully, I just kept things under control. My friends didn't really believe me. Why should they? They hadn't ever met her. They didn't know what she was really like, so they didn't understand my horror and revulsion at seeing her, at seeing what I could only now think of as it. They laughed and told me I was imagining things, and this is what can happen in a long-distance relationship. They agreed to let me stay at their house that night, but I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I kept expecting to hear footsteps or scratching sounds at the window or my name. That was a few weeks ago, and since then, everything has gotten worse. I see it everywhere, in public, through the windows when I'm at home, everywhere. I tried to break things off with her, with it, through messages, but I think it only made things worse. Every night I hear sounds all around my apartment. I hear shuffling, hear my name being called in that voice that isn't hers, and other noises. Things I can't describe and don't want to know the truth of. I can't sleep, can't eat, can't even go outside anymore. Every window I look at, I can see it, waiting for me, grinning, gesturing to me. I don't know what it did with Chelsea, if she's still alive somehow or part of this it, or why it's come after me, but I have to do something. I have to stop it, have to get it to go away, to leave me alone, or else. I'm sharing this because my mind feels like it's about to break. Every day I'm losing more and more of myself. Every glimpse of it pushes me closer and closer to the edge. I'm slipping, and I don't know how to catch myself or what will happen next. I need help, I need help, I need help. Chelsea, if you're somehow still out there somewhere and can read this, know that I will always love you. To everyone else, be careful. Be careful about what you do and who you talk to. Be careful. I need help, I need help, I need help, I need help. I've done things that I shouldn't have done. I won't say I'm not proud of them because I am. I ruined people's lives. You've probably seen or heard at least some of my work. I can't even begin to list it all here, not in the least, because I don't remember all of it. I have hundreds of burner accounts across Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and others. That's not even counting the 14 Tinder profiles I run regularly. With these tools, I destroyed so many other people's lives that I lost track. But I remember the worst ones. There was a girl vlogger on YouTube who did makeup tutorials and other boring crap. Very sweet girl, doing YouTube on the side in college. She wasn't the most popular, but her audience was devoted and consistently gave her almost 100,000 views per video. Finding her was a happy accident, really. I was scrolling through one of my Tinder accounts and happened upon her profile. In it, she mentioned she was a vlogger. I realized I had an opportunity. My Tinder profile was that of a guy straight out of a romantic comedy. Tall, dark, and handsome. The pictures were from some obscure male model on Instagram. The vlogger took the bait, and we began talking back and forth. This wasn't the first time I'd catfished someone, so I knew all the right things to say. I played a sensitive yet mature medical student whose dream was to start a free clinic to help inner-city kids. The vlogger was in love with me after a week. I played it slow, reeling her in a little bit each time. She linked me her YouTube channel, and I fed her some BS about how amazing it was. We texted almost every day for 2 months about everything. Her parents were extremely religious and conservative, and she was happy she was away at college and out from under their thumb. She wanted to Skype or call on multiple occasions, but I was able to come up with some excuse every time. Finally, in the midst of a particularly intimate text conversation, she sent me a nude photo. Before I even responded to her, I posted that photo on every single one of her social media accounts and linked it in the comments of a dozen of her YouTube videos. The response was devastating. Every day for the next 2 weeks, that photo was posted by hundreds of other users all over the internet. The vlogger was harassed constantly. Every new video's comment section was clogged with slut and whore. Her Twitter timeline was filled with that photo over and over. Finally, she deactivated her YouTube channel and deleted all of her social media accounts. Her last video was her sobbing in front of the camera and talking about how her parents had pulled her out of college after someone sent them the picture. I watched that video 100 times. The power, the control I felt was exhilarating. I had crushed a human being's life, changed it forever without a second thought. That was the beginning. I was obsessed with feeling that power again. I was good at what I did. I had a dozen accounts that I used to spam hate at a popular Twitch streamer with. Finally, he snapped and called one of them a racial slur during a live stream. The backlash was swift and vicious. He lost thousands of followers and all of his sponsors. Without the money, he had to abandon streaming and go back to working some dead-end job full-time. Another time, I dug up some old tweets from a reasonably well-known actor and spread them around online. These tweets contained some ridiculously offensive jokes and were quickly picked up by the outrage mob that is the internet, and culminated with a campaign to fire the actor from the TV show he was starring in at the time. The producers of the show had to cave to public pressure, and that actor hasn't been in anything other than crummy indie films since. There were others. Many, many others. I don't care if you believe me or not. I was a god, a faceless, nameless entity of cyberspace who could snuff out the lives of others like insects. I spent every waking minute I could looking for new targets, monitoring my many accounts. Other people were so small to me. I watched their meaningless lives on the internet, and I destroyed them. They were ants, tiny beneath my heel. It was incredible. In our world today, people put everything online. And I could take it all away, until yesterday. It was a typical day. I was on one of my burner Twitter accounts when I got a random DM. I would have ignored it until I realized that it was from one of my own accounts. I was baffled, so I opened the message. It read, "I know who you are." Odd, but I dismissed it as a weird virus that I must have got. I logged in and deleted that account and was about to forget about it when I got another DM from another one of my burner accounts. This one said, "I know your true face." I was even more confused. Before I could even log into that account, another DM came in. "The time has come for you to atone for your sins." I was beginning to get worried. This didn't seem like a virus. As I was contemplating what to do, my phone buzzed. I picked it up and saw I had a text from a blocked number. "You are nothing." I began to panic. What the hell was going on? I was being hacked by someone, targeted, but how? I had always been extremely careful, never using one account for too long, never revealing any personal info. My PC was heavily encrypted. How could someone have gotten into my accounts and have found my phone number? This was bad. It got worse. I was going through my multiple Facebook accounts and changing passwords when I noticed one of them had a new post. Fearing the worst, I clicked on it. It was a list of everything I have just told you. Names, descriptions of my crimes and victims, lists of people whose lives I had ruined, confessionals of things I had done. And it ended signed with my full name, social security number, and home address. I panicked and deleted the post. Had anyone seen it? How could this be happening to me? A shiver of fear went down my back. If this had been posted on one account, I logged into another account, and another, and another. The post of my crimes was on every one. I deleted them as quickly as I could, but I had many accounts. Hundreds of accounts. Everything I had done from behind the anonymity of a computer monitor. All of my careful manipulations and lies that I had thought could never be traced back to me. All of it had been exposed. I haven't left my apartment since this happened. Someone out there is watching me, waiting to punish me. I don't know what to do. I went to dial 911 a while ago, not even knowing exactly what I would say. But my phone buzzed with a text before I could finish dialing. It contained a single word. "Don't. They are watching me." Hidden cameras in the apartment, maybe? Or did they hack my webcam and are watching me as I type this very moment? I don't know. Any moment they could come for me. How is this happening? I had power, I had control. I had ruined people's lives with the click of a mouse. Now I am nothing. Now I am small. The first time I noticed it, I was just a girl trying to navigate a world that wasn't built for me. In my computer science classes, the ratio of men to women was 4-1. Most of them were fine, just students looking to get through the coursework. But there was always that small percentage, the ones who felt entitled, the ones who called themselves nice guys. At first, it was just a few messages here and there. A classmate asking for help with a project, only for the conversation to steer into unsettling territory. Some acted as if a simple exchange of words was an invitation, and when I didn't respond the way they wanted, their niceties curdled into something darker. Insults, accusations, threats. I learned quickly to limit my online presence. The first time it happened, I dismissed it as an awkward misunderstanding. A classmate who lingered too long after a group project, his messages becoming oddly personal. Then came the late-night text from someone I barely knew, asking if I needed company. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted. Accusations, passive-aggressive jabs, sometimes outright hostility. After the third incident in a month, I realized I had to disappear before I became a target for something worse. I scrubbed my social media, made separate accounts for group projects, and avoided unnecessary interactions. At first, it felt like a small sacrifice for peace of mind, but over time, the isolation settled in. Every post deleted, every notification silenced. I felt like a ghost, watching from the shadows as others carried on freely, unaware of the precautions I had to take just to exist online without fear. But there was one place I couldn't disappear from: LinkedIn. Unlike social media, which I could erase, LinkedIn was essential for my future. Networking, internships, job applications. If I vanished from there, I might as well have erased my career before it even began. The idea of keeping a professional presence while being exposed to strangers, some of whom had already proven their persistence, was unnerving. It was a necessity for networking, for internships, for job prospects, and, as I would soon learn, a beacon for the most persistent and determined among them. The ones who couldn't find me elsewhere turned to professional platforms, their messages laced with thinly veiled desperation. By my third year, it was suffocating. The constant, gnawing anxiety followed me even into my coursework. Was this what it would be like in the industry? Was this the price I had to pay just to exist in a male-dominated field? I felt trapped. My options were bleak. Continue living under the radar, meticulously curating every online interaction. Confront every creep publicly, knowing they'd just make new accounts. Pretend I had a boyfriend, as if that ever stopped them. Make myself as unappealing as possible. Ridiculous. Drop out. Not happening. Try to understand them. Get inside their heads. It was that last thought that took root. What if I could study them the way a biologist observes parasites? I could create a controlled environment, lure them in, and analyze them from a distance. Maybe I could even change some minds, force them out of their echo chambers. I brought the idea to Professor Menzies, one of the few female professors in the department. She listened carefully, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she sat in silence for a moment before nodding. "If you do this, you need to be careful," she said, "and keep it anonymous." With her hesitant approval and the promise of extra credit, I got to work. The website wasn't difficult to build, just time-consuming. In the end, girlsforniceguys.com was up and running. A chat room, simple and unassuming. At first, I thought I'd need chatbots to keep the conversations flowing, but I quickly realized that wasn't necessary. All I had to do was bait the hook. I used my spare change to buy Google ads targeting specific search terms. Why don't girls like nice guys? Why do girls like bad boys? Why do nice guys finish last? It was almost too easy. Within hours, the chat room filled with users. At first, the conversations were filled with predictable complaints, lamentations of being ignored, of women choosing the wrong men, of the unfairness of it all. Then, the anger began to seep through, barely concealed beneath the self-pity. One user detailed how he followed a girl from his campus just to see where she lived, insisting it wasn't stalking, just curiosity. Another mused about how women needed to be taught a lesson for their choices. The more they spoke, the more I felt the unease settle deep in my bones. I wasn't just observing a subculture. I'd opened a door into something much darker. They ranted about being ignored, about how women were shallow, about how they deserved love but were always overlooked. I watched, took notes, and observed patterns. Then I noticed him. Unloved shadow. At first, his messages seemed like the others, bitter, frustrated. But then he started writing in a different way. My love smells like the freshness of flowers after a spring rain. Her scent dances around me on a bed of white lily flowers and violet leaves. I almost dismissed it, then another message. Her cool brown eyes move in my direction through fiery red bangs. My heart flutters and cracks when I notice her stare straight past me. I stopped breathing. My eyes, brown. My hair, red. Then, the final message that sent my stomach dropping. When my love writes her E's, she starts from the tail. It's the little quirks that make me fall harder. I stared at my keyboard. It was a habit I'd had since childhood. A small, insignificant detail, one no one should have noticed. My hands trembled as I grabbed my perfume bottle, flipping it over. White lily flowers, violet leaves. I almost shut everything down right then. But against every instinct screaming at me to run, I opened a private chat instead. Our conversation was short. I tried to keep it neutral, casual, but every answer he gave only deepened my sense of unease. He spoke in riddles, like he already knew what I was thinking. He told me love couldn't always be spoken aloud, that sometimes it had to be understood. When I asked him who he was, he hesitated before replying with a name that sent a shiver down my spine. Drew. I didn't know a Drew, not in my classes, not in my dorm, not in my social circles. Maybe it was a coincidence, I told myself. Maybe he was just making things up. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself that I was overreacting. After all, plenty of people named Drew existed. It didn't have to mean anything. But then, a sinking sensation settled deep in my stomach. My mind began pulling apart my own excuses. Had I really never noticed him before? Could I have dismissed someone lingering just out of sight? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, reluctant to confirm the possibility that had already begun to take root. Plenty of people named Drew existed in the world. It didn't have to mean anything. But the unease gnawed at me, growing with each passing second. Had I overlooked someone? A face in the crowd? A classmate whose name I never bothered to remember? The rationalizations only made it worse. My mind raced through possibilities, searching for an answer I didn't want to find. But then I thought about my professors. The thought was absurd until I checked my email. There was a message from Professor Menzies. Hi, Eve. Prof. Jackson mentioned your absence. I told him about your project last week in confidence. Here's to hoping he cuts you some slack. Let me know how things are going. Prof. Menzies. I reread it. My blood turned to ice. Professor Jackson. I never knew his first name. Our university was strict about formalities. I scrolled through old emails until I found one from the start of the semester. Signed off as Professor Andrew Jackson. Andrew, Drew. A knock at my door made me jump. I checked the peephole. Professor Jackson. I won't tell you what he said to make me open it. His words were carefully chosen, each syllable wrapped in honey, yet something about them felt off. Too rehearsed, too perfect. A part of me hesitated, a whisper in my mind urging me to stop, but before I knew it, my fingers were already unlocking the door. And now, he's here. He's so nice, so smart, so caring. I've let him spend the weekend. I had to tell everyone about this story with his blessing, of course. Don't hide from those who love you. It can change your life. Go against your better judgment. Give them a chance. It's worth it. I try to type something else. I can't. His voice, soft and patient, hums behind me as I stare at the screen. His breath is warm against my neck. He whispers, "Tell them you're happy." My fingers tremble over the keys. I try to resist, but my hands betray me. My fingers tremble, cold sweat forming at my temples. My breath comes in shallow gasps, my pulse hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I will them to stop, to freeze, but they move against my wishes, typing, obeying a force stronger than my fear. Please. The screen flickers. A new email appears. From me. My hands hover over the keys, shaking. A moment passes, then another. My breathing is shallow, heart pounding, and yet I watch as the cursor moves on its own, the send button clicking without my consent. Sent to everyone on my contacts list. I found love, honest. I am on the spectrum, somewhere between Mozart and being unable to tie my shoes. Conversations don't come easy. You could say I'm slow, the answer to the question, the empathetic reassurance, the witty quip. All enter my head 10 seconds delayed. So I'll nod or say, okay, and smile, anything to get through a conversation. but being boring doesn't help you make friends. It's different on the internet. The late 90s was the heyday of chat rooms. Remember IRC? I met my best friends there because I could take time to respond. I could think of that witty quip to reflect my personality or express something heartfelt. It liberated me from my shell and shyness, and that's where I met the love of my life too. Look, I won't bore you with the story of an internet romance. I still get nervous when I remember the day Lynn drove 200 miles to see me. I was sure that when she met me, my boring personality would extinguish her fondness. But by some miracle, that's not what happened. When we married, there were 3 people at our wedding, all from IRC chat rooms. My parents, who had been ashamed of me and kicked me out when I turned 18, didn't show up. My best man was my friend Juan, who I'd bonded with after hundreds of hours on IRC. Having all the people who I cared about, and who cared about me, in one place made it the best day of my life. I'd never felt so appreciated, loved, and connected. Today, I'm alone again. And I come to you with a warning. Don't do what I did. Don't pray to gods you have no business praying to. I was raised Pentecostal, a Protestant movement that emphasizes speaking in tongues. Now, as someone with Asperger's who had enough trouble speaking with one tongue, I couldn't comprehend what it meant to be possessed by the Holy Spirit. I couldn't explain it to you if I tried. Imagine a church filled with people bopping as if possessed and fake-speaking Swahili. I affirmed my atheism the day my parents tossed me onto the streets. I was not unsure if God existed. I was certain God didn't exist. In school one day, I'd watched a documentary on the after effects of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. These people, called hibakusha, suffered something uniquely inhuman, destructive, and evil. Many of them had burns and sicknesses from the nuclear radiation that had literally corrupted their DNA, their humanity. Many died in ways far worse than being eviscerated in the explosion. Imagine the cells of your skin dividing with altered DNA that turns your flesh into a translucent mush. To die because the fabric of your being has been corrupted, to my strange mind seemed so unholy, so ungodly, that in a world where such things happen, God couldn't exist. So why did I pray each night to a different God until things got so out of control I wish I'd never met my wife or used IRC? It started the day she left me. We'd loved each other for 2 decades and been married for 1. I won't get into how a long marriage takes its toll. The passion dried out years ago and decayed into an assumed comfort. Now, I thought that was how it was supposed to be. But, as I often realized, I thought differently from others. Because one day, she left without warning. Gone, leaving only a note laid on a stack of divorce papers. The note mentioned that she had met someone else. Online, of course. They'd been chatting for a while. She'd met him once already, and now she was going to be with him. Great. Though our marriage wasn't all sparks and heat, I thought we were content. I felt peace in my heart and connected to her. We didn't have kids, but we were enough for each other. Or at least, she was enough for me. The day she left, I poured myself a glass of chocolate milk and waited on the living room sofa for her to come home. I couldn't believe she was gone. I waited for the door to open and for her to burst through with a shopping bag and talking about how bad traffic was or how the neighbors had remodeled their porch. I waited until 1 a.m. before I built up enough despair to call her phone. But it was off. I sent her emails, but she never replied. The next day, I stayed home from work because the despair and loneliness pounding through my body paralyzed and sickened me. I couldn't eat or even sip water. I curled up into a ball on the living room floor and shivered until I passed out. It was Juan who found me, unresponsive, and called an ambulance. I woke up in the hospital. Apparently, on top of my heartbreak, I had a vitamin D deficiency that had contributed to my ill state. The doctor prescribed tablets, told me to go outside more, and sent me home. Juan let me stay with him and his wife for a few days. He'd married a Muslim girl and had converted to be with her. That made him the only Muslim Korean I knew of. While staying at his home, I found a copy of the Holy Quran in English. I spent a few hours reading, hoping that it would enlighten me, that some truth would burst forth and save me from the base despair that crippled me. Instead, I read a verse that made me angry. And whosoever believeth in God, he guideth his heart, and God is knower of all things. Why wasn't I a believer? Why didn't God guide me? Was I not good enough for him to guide? I then read another verse that made me even angrier. He it is who sent down peace of reassurance into the hearts of the believers, that they might add faith unto their faith. Something in me snapped when I read that verse. It seemed that God was choosing people to believe and not the other way around. That was unfair. If this world was a test, as Christians also claim, then surely God should allow us to choose whether to believe. Later that day, I went home and read about Islam. I learned that to become a Muslim, all I had to do was recite some words. So I recited them to prove to God that it was my choice, not his, to believe. I now realize that this was a distraction from the pain, and that the real pain was coming. I learned how to pray like a Muslim. Before each prayer, I would do the cleansing ritual by washing my face, hands, and feet. I'd then follow the steps for the prayer, from standing to bowing to prostration. I even learned the recitals in Arabic. I truly felt reborn, and with this fresh way of life seemed to be turning a new page. I met people at the mosque who were kind and didn't seem to judge me for being slow. But at the end of the day, I still came home to an empty house, and I still didn't really believe in God. Soon, the prayers became a burden, and without faith in my heart, I felt awkward going to the mosque and being among true believers. God really hadn't chosen me, and the hole that ached in my heart when Lynn left only grew, despite how much I covered it. It was a gaping chasm, and I felt its emptiness in every cell of my body. It affirmed to me how meaningless the world was and how there was no God. The Hibakusha, the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, must have felt the same evisceration of spirit when faced with their doom. They say religion is like a drug. Well, I was in withdrawal, so I moved on to other religions. I bought dozens of holy texts. I even went to the local community college and sat in on some religion classes. It filled the void, temporarily. One day, I went to the mall. I saw a couple my age, holding hands and smiling while window shopping. I remembered when Lynn and I walked through this mall, doing the same thing. I knew with my social skills, I'd never meet someone who loved me like her again. If miracles were proof of God, then the greatest miracle I'd ever witnessed was her accepting and loving me. At that moment, I prayed to God, "If you're there, bring Lynn back to me." This is where things get strange. And you may not believe me, because when I recount it, I don't believe myself. I opened the mailbox one chilly autumn morning before heading to work. Beneath a pile of junk mail was a brown hardcover book. It was not in an envelope, so someone had dropped it there. The cover was devoid of any text or images. I didn't think much of it and left it on the kitchen table, where it got buried under junk mail and bills. When I came home from work that day, Lynn was sitting on my couch. "You didn't even change the locks," she said. I stared at her. I'm slow, so it takes me a while to respond with something other than yeah or okay. "Look, I only came to get the divorce papers, remember? Did you ever sign them?" In my mind, it was as if Lynn was dead. To see her again was a miracle akin to Jesus bringing Lazarus back to life. It was as if my prayer had been answered with a sign of God. "I'll need those papers within the week. My lawyer will pick them up. This may be the last time you will see me." Lynn was about to walk out the door when I finally thought of what to say. "Did I not make you happy?" "You did once, but that all changed the day I met him. Come back to me, Lynn. I can't go on without you. As much as you deserve happiness, I do too." She headed for the door. "Lynn, don't go." I stood in front of the door to block her from leaving. "Please talk to me." "I'm done talking. There's no way you will ever make me happy. You're not normal, John. You're all bottled up. When we first met, you were different. You had a side to you that was so aware, so alive. Who do you show that side to now, if not me?" I couldn't figure out how to answer that. In my view, I hadn't changed, and it was her who had become withdrawn in the months before she left. Upon realizing I wasn't going to say anything, Lynn left. Now that I think back on that moment, it was my first true spiritual experience. While I was stuck in my usual Asperger's haze, I was also in awe that she had come back. That the only woman who had accepted me and made me whole was still real, standing in my house, and that maybe it was possible for her to be with me again. I began praying every night. Not in any particular way, but privately to God. Sometimes I'd get on my knees like a Pentecostal or hold my hands up the way Muslims do. Whatever seemed right. And I'd always ask, repeatedly, for God to bring her back to me. A few days later, her lawyer visited. I knew he was coming, and I had prepared a few things to say. "I'd like to meet with Lynn." "That's not going to happen. She doesn't want to talk to you." "Then why did she come to my house?" "To remind you to sign the papers." I tried to find her phone number. It took some cajoling of mutual friends, something I didn't know I was capable of, but I did get her number. Calling it was useless. As soon as she realized it was me, she blocked my number. When I called her with a new number, she threatened to file a restraining order. I even found out her new address, an ideal neighborhood on an affluent street with cherry trees. The house was twice the size of mine, so whoever she had found must have been twice as rich. Sometimes after work I'd drive by, but I wasn't going to knock on the door. It was not our house. I didn't belong there, and in my mind, our relationship could not be saved there. My attempts to reach her were fruitless, and I was in despair. Maybe she was never coming back. That hole in my heart that whispered I was utterly alone drained me of hope. I curled up in our bathtub and turned on the shower. When I was a child, I'd do this on shitty days, like when other kids would torment me for being dull. The water hitting your face is like welcoming the rain after a blistering day. But now, it just reminded me of all the times I felt safe and comfortable, reassured that no matter what shitty thing happened, I always had Lynn to come home to. She made me feel accepted and gave me a place to belong. Then she ripped that from me. "God, let us be together again." I repeated it again and again, until my skin became clammy with wetness and cold. Days passed quickly. Her lawyer would come by, and I'd insist that I wouldn't sign the divorce papers without seeing my wife. I was told that if I didn't sign, the court would just divorce us anyway. At the time, I didn't care about the terms of the divorce. I just wanted to talk to Lynn and win her back, so it made no difference what the court did if I could delay the divorce as long as possible. It was at this time that, in my downward spiral, I began to pray to different gods. If the one God, the Abrahamic God or monotheist God or whatever you want to call him, didn't exist enough to help me, then maybe others did. Buddha seemed different enough from the Abrahamic God, though he wasn't exactly God-like. I drove to the nearest Buddhist temple. I lit some incense and stuck it in a mound before a gleaming golden statue of Buddha and prayed. "O Buddha, bring Lynn and I back together again. The next night, I went to a Hindu temple. They have so many gods in their religion, and each temple is devoted to a different god. This one had an almost cartoonish statue of the goddess Shakti, who they call the Great Divine Mother. I put some satinol wood paste on my face and placed 9 flowers before her statue in a circle. I then held 2 incense sticks and prayed, "O Shakti, bring Lynn back to me." As the weeks went by, I ran out of organized religions. I started with the cults, but in America, most cults are Christian-based, so I'd end up praying to Abraham's God again. And the ones which don't worship God worship his nemesis. Praying to Satan felt wrong, but I said my prayer just in case. "Satan, if you're there, let Lynn and I be one again." I then moved to obscure gods. I read books and articles to make sure I got the prayer rituals right. But Ahura Mazda, god of light for the Zoroastrians, didn't answer my prayer. Neither did Akal Purak nor Amaterasu Omakami. I went from the obscure to the dead. Jupiter, Odin, Ra. None of them cared for my desperate call. I was running out of gods, and with each failed prayer, out of hope. I woke up one morning at 4 a.m. The bare light of false dawn glowed in the sky. Birds hadn't started chirping. The world was peaceful and silent. At that moment, I realized how crazy I'd been acting. I thought about the Hibakusha, who lost their loved ones in nuclear annihilation. In this life, people suffer and die alone. God and gods don't exist. These are facts, and you either face them or escape into fantasy. I decided to read the divorce papers and hire a lawyer. While looking for the papers under a pile on the kitchen table, I found the brown book I'd received in the mail many days ago. It had a heft to it, but the leathery cover felt premium and inviting. I opened it and read the title, Prayer Book. I flipped through the pages, all empty without word or image except for one page at the end. The page was also without word or image, but it wasn't empty. Taped to it was an SD card, the kind used in cameras. I brought my laptop down from the bedroom and slotted it in. The SD card had one file. It contained a link to an IRC server. I had to download an IRC client as I hadn't used the program in years. The IRC server was called Rapture_2018, and there was one channel, Hash Prayer Room. I entered it. The only one there was a user named Brother. A message blinked onto the screen, forming in a slow, deliberate crawl. "What do you seek?" I hesitated before typing. My fingers felt heavy as they hovered over the keyboard. What is this? A pause. The cursor blinked twice before another message appeared, like a whisper slithering through the screen. "Is there something your heart desires?" I swallowed hard. Something about this felt wrong. "Who are you?" "I can teach you how to pray." A shiver crawled up my spine. The room felt colder, the shadows in the corners stretching toward me. "Pray to who?" "To X." I stared at the letters, the single character like a void staring back at me. Before I continue, I must mention that X is not his actual name. I've changed it for your safety because I don't want you discovering this god or repeating what I was about to do. X? The only one real enough to give you what you want. My breath hitched. A faint ringing buzzed in my ears. What do I have to do? "I will guide you, but before you proceed, know that there is a price." "Price?" "X will take you." My heartbeat thundered against my ribs. "Take me where?" "To be one with him forever. To the rapture, rapture." Another crazy teaching I remember from Pentecostal sermons. I don't mean to offend anyone who believes in it, but the thought that God would whisk us into the sky seemed more to terrify than reassure. What if I don't want to go? Then X can take what he gives, It's your choice entirely. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could feel something unseen pressing in around me, the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes watching, waiting. Okay, teach me how to pray to X. The response came almost immediately, as if Brother had been anticipating my surrender. Follow these steps exactly. Since you don't know X's name, they won't work for you. Still, I advise you not to try. Begin a fast at sunrise from eating, drinking, and talking. During this period, do not let your mind dwell on anything so that you are clear-headed. After sunset, travel to a secluded area, such as a desert, forest, or mountain, where you can clearly see the night sky. You must arrive before midnight. Lie down on your back and face the sky. Locate the constellation Perseus. Find the star Algol and concentrate on it. Repeat the name of X until you fall asleep. X will visit you in a dream. He will appear as someone you know and trust. Tell him exactly what you want. Within 6 days, you will see the result of your prayer. I waited for Saturday. The fasting part wasn't hard because I didn't have an appetite. My father used to take my big brother and me to this forest camping spot, one of the few happy memories I have of my childhood. I drove there a few hours before midnight. Now I must explain something. When I was 12, my big brother was killed in a car accident. Unlike me, he was a social butterfly and high achiever at school and pretty much everything he did. I think losing him was too much for my parents, because it meant I was the only legacy they would ever have, and they never forgave me for that. Anyway, I thought I was going to see Juan in the dream, but X took the form of my big brother. I didn't even realize it was a dream. As I lay down in the forest in my sleeping bag, a man approached. It was my big brother, still 17 years old and rocking a leather jacket, looking just like on the day he died. At first, I didn't want to talk to him, afraid that it would break my fast. The hunger, thirst, and autumn cold made it hard for me to process what was going on. But when he asked me what I desired, I didn't even have to think of a response. "Brother, I wish I was like you." That's what came out of my mouth because that's how I'd felt my entire life. Jealous of him, of his abilities, and of the love my parents showered on him. My brother smiled at me, unnaturally wide. I'd never seen him smile like that, as if his cheek muscles were being pulled by a string. That's when, in my slow brain, I realized what was going on. I'd said the wrong prayer, and then he was gone. Chirping birds and howling forest animals woke me. I wiggled out of my sleeping bag and drove home. The first thing I did after chugging a pitcher of water and slurping a can of tuna was to log onto that IRC server, but I kept getting the server could not be found error. I searched for the server but got no relevant results. Nothing happened or changed in the following days, until 6 days later, which coincidentally was the court date set for Lynn and me to divorce. Dressed in my best suit, I arrived at the courtroom. Something had changed. I felt a power deep in my being that had always been there as a shadow, but never fully realized. I felt confident. On top of that, I had a clarity of mind that made the words in my brain roll off my tongue. But I did not have Lynn. That day, Lynn never showed, and since she was the initiating party, the judge couldn't proceed with the divorce. Our marriage stood. Her lawyer was just as puzzled as me, but suggested that it was cold feet. I drove to her house. The trees in her yard were laden with cherries. As usual, curtains covered the windows. Did she ever get any sunlight? It took 5 minutes of waiting by the door before I mustered the courage to knock. Would her lover answer? This witty, rich, and handsome man who'd stolen her from me? The person Lynn deserved? Who would make her happy the rest of her life? I knocked. Despite the newfound confidence, my nerves had me shivering during the wait. It was Lynn who answered the door. How beautiful she was. In my mind, as youthful and exuberant as the day we met. She smiled. I missed you so much, my dear John. Her hug was like the rain hitting your face after a hot day. A prayer answered. Lynn, let's go home. Come inside first. I want you to meet him. I don't want to meet him, Lynn, but I promise I'll love you more than he ever could. I've changed. I can be the man you want me to be, the man you deserve. So please, come home. John, you must meet him. He's the reason we can be together again. I didn't know what she meant. Lynn grabbed my hand and dragged me inside. Once the door shut, I found out. This was not a house. It was a temple. A temple to X. The place was filled with people, all on their knees, as still as statues. They stared at the ceiling and recited the name of X. Something odd on their faces sent a shudder through me. Their eyes had no pupils. What the hell is happening here, Lynn? The rapture, my love. As if in slow motion, the worshippers rose to their feet and turned to look at us with their blank white eyes. Lynn, we have to go. I grabbed her and tried to open the front door, but it was stuck. We made a promise, didn't we, John? That when the time came, we would go with X. No, I don't want to. I just want to be with you. I want to go back to the way things were, when we were happy. But that's not what you want, John. You were never truly happy with me because you were never happy with yourself. Isn't that why you prayed too? The worshippers pointed at me and opened their mouths, unnaturally wide, as if pulled by strings. They approached. I kicked the front door. I kicked and kicked until it flung open. But Lynn was no longer next to me. Lynn! Without taking their eyes off me, the worshippers pointed at an open door. It led to a dim basement. I rushed down to look for my wife. As I entered, the door slammed shut, leaving me in darkness. The stench of rotting flesh and blood filled my nose. I turned on my cell phone flashlight. Bodies all over the floor. Worms crawling through eye sockets. Rats digging through intestines. I tried to hold back the vomit, but it spewed out of me and onto the wall. Lynn! He's here, John! I walked toward her voice, careful not to step on the bodies. At the end of the room, there was a raised surface with a stone slab in the middle. Upon that slab was another body. This was a sacrificial altar. Turn off the light, John. He doesn't like light. The body shook. Someone bit it. Flesh was chomped on and blood gushed. Whatever was eating the body slowly stood, until it was so tall its head hit the ceiling. Its eyes were too big for its head. It had no nose, only a wide mouth with fangs. Flesh and blood dripped off its mouth as it smiled at me. Lynn, if you still love me, let's go now. I couldn't see Lynn. I had to run. I burst through the basement door and ran outside. Once in the car, I mashed the accelerator. In that panic, I must have crashed into another car because I woke up in a hospital bed with a concussion and broken bones. Juan, my emergency contact since my wife left, sat next to me. Maybe it was the concussion from the airbag smashing my head, but I felt slow again, unclear and uncertain about what to say and what was even in my mind. Juan explained what happened. A few hours after I was taken to the hospital, the police responded to a call about that house. When they arrived, everyone in the house was dead. They had killed themselves as part of some ritual. Even worse, each body had been partially eaten, as if by an animal. I stayed in the hospital for several weeks, relying on Juan for updates on the investigation. The police would never find the IRC server, despite the information I gave them. The SD card and the prayer book didn't lead them anywhere. But the strangest part was how everyone in the house died. Their hearts just stopped, without any trace of substances that could cause it, as if their souls had been whisked away into rapture. but their bodies had stayed, to be consumed by rats and worms and wild animals, as the police claimed. Only I knew the truth, though I didn't tell anyone because I barely believed it myself. The most painful moment of my life was being wheeled to the hospital morgue to identify my wife's dead body. A dozen bodies lay on tables, missing half a face or a thigh or some stomach. Lynn lay there with a hole in her chest that had been sewed up. Her heart and lungs had been eaten. I squeezed her hand and cried. I said out loud, "Whoever is listening, I'll do anything, just bring her back to me." I had a dream the night before I left the hospital. I was camping with my big brother and father in the forest. We were laughing and eating s'mores by a fire. Then my father started talking about the constellation Perseus. He showed us how to find the star Algol. If you think of Perseus as holding a severed head, Algol is always the brightest star on it. While my father got on his knees and recited the name of X, my brother whispered to me, "She tasted like cherries. One day, I'll taste you too." His eyes had no pupils, and his face twitched into an unnatural smile. I don't know why Lynn prayed to X or what she prayed for, but her desperation must have led her to him. Maybe she was unhappy. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe at some point I stopped being true with her and pushed her away, and she turned to X for an answer. Anyway, I live alone now, and I'm still slow and uncertain of the future. But like the Hibakusha, I survived. And whether that's worse than death, only life will tell. In the end, I think my faithlessness saved me. I don't believe in God, but maybe there are beings that hear our desperate prayers. And maybe it's better if they don't answer us at all. In the quiet of the last few days, something strange has been happening to me. Things I can't quite explain. I thought it might help to share my story. Fair warning, though, I have a tendency to ramble and get lost in tangents. But I'll do my best to keep it simple and to the point. It's the least you deserve. As far as I can remember, I'm a 35-year-old man. I think my birthday was a couple of months ago, but honestly, I couldn't say for certain. What I do know about myself is this: I live my life almost entirely online. And when I say entirely, I mean it. I spend my days hopping between forums, lurking on Reddit, and scrolling through social media feeds. Most of my time is spent arguing about movies, about video games, about whatever topic gets me riled up in the moment. Don't get me wrong, I think I love those things. Movies and games, I mean. But truth be told, I spend more time dissecting them, debating them, than I do actually enjoying them. One thing I really can't stand is when people try to inject politics into media. Why can't they just let things be? Why do they always have to make everything about some kind of age DNA? But I digress. It started a few days ago, I think. Time blurs together when you're in my world, so it's hard to be sure. I had just gone to the bathroom, and on my way out, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. What I saw made me stop in my tracks. Now, let me set the record straight. I've never considered myself a particularly good-looking guy. I'm average at best, just another face in the crowd. The kind of person you'd pass on the street and think, "That's just a regular guy, nothing special." But what I saw in that mirror wasn't just regular. In the mirror, I saw a man, though his age was hard to pin down. He was unmistakably an adult, but he could have been anywhere from his 30s to his 50s. His appearance was unsettling, almost otherworldly. Balding, with a few defiant strands of hair clinging stubbornly to the sides of his head, as if refusing to let go of their last scraps of dignity. His eyes were bloodshot, the kind of crimson that made you wonder if he'd sampled every drug capable of wreaking such havoc. Dark, swollen bags hung heavily beneath them, etched into his face like scars of sleepless nights and restless days. His body was worse. Gaunt to the point of grotesque, yet somehow littered with odd pockets of fat in all the wrong places. It wasn't just unhealthy, it was unnatural, like some cruel joke played on anatomy. This creature was me. How could it be? I stumbled back from the mirror, heart pounding, as the realization clawed at my mind. My thoughts were a jumble of confusion and dread, but they were interrupted by something sharp, something immediate. A horrible toothache tore through my skull, radiating pain that made my whole head throb. Instinctively, I touched the side of my face, trying to pinpoint the source. As my fingers brushed against my jaw, I felt it. A tooth had chipped, a jagged shard breaking loose and rolling around inside my mouth like some cursed relic. The metallic tang of blood followed, and I froze, unsure whether to spit it out or swallow it. This wasn't normal. None of this was. It was then that I realized the horrifying truth. I was missing a good portion of my teeth. How could that have happened? How could I not have noticed something so obvious, so fundamental? That's the sort of thing anyone would recognize immediately, the moment it occurred. And yet, somehow, I hadn't. In that instant of clarity, despair flooded through me like nothing I'd ever felt before. It wasn't the kind of vague unease I was used to. This was sharp, overwhelming, consuming. I knew without a doubt that I needed to see a doctor or a dentist or anyone who could make sense of what was happening to me. Someone who could fix it, or at the very least tell me that it wasn't too late. I took a step toward the door, ready to leave, and then I froze. The thought of stepping outside paralyzed me. If I went out there, people would see me. They would look at me. They would smell me. They would feel the weight of my presence like some oppressive fog. Sweat beaded on my forehead as the idea spiraled out of control. I imagined a hot female crossing my path, her flawless beauty marred by the disgust that would twist across her face at the sight of me. She'd recoil, silently pleading with God to explain how such a grotesque creature could inhabit the same world, the same reality as someone like her. And the men, oh, the men, they would see me and feel a rush of relief that they weren't me. I would become the unspoken benchmark for their gratitude. At least I'm not him, they'd think, and their day would be made at my expense. I lingered there, frozen in the grip of these thoughts, every awful scenario playing out in vivid detail. My heart raced, and my resolve crumbled under the weight of shame. Finally, unable to bear the idea of exposing myself to the world, I turned back toward the computer. It was easier that way. It always was. As I sat back down, the screen flickered. For the briefest moment, my reflection stared back at me from the darkened monitor. Not the faint ghost of my face, but that grotesque version. And for the first time, it smiled. As I mentioned, I spent a lot of time online, and that day was no different. I can't recall exactly what I was doing, but I think it had something to do with another wave of backlash against some woke game developers getting what they deserved for releasing yet another failure of a game. It was honestly pretty entertaining. These developers can't write a decent story to save their lives, yet they strut around talking about how groundbreaking and inclusive their work is. It's painfully obvious what they're doing. Just swapping the gender of major characters so they can cash in on some government incentives. I hope they enjoyed the money they got from my taxes because, judging by the abysmal player counts, no one is paying to actually play that garbage. What was I saying? Oh, right. After shutting down my PC for the night, I decided to order some fast food. Scrolling through X on my phone passed the time until the delivery arrived. When I got the notification that it was here, I texted the driver to leave it at the door and waited quietly until I heard his footsteps retreating. The burger was good, really good actually. Juicy, cheesy, exactly the kind of indulgence I needed after the day I'd had. But as I unwrapped it and casually glanced at the receipt, something caught my eye. My name wasn't on it. Instead, it showed the username I use for everything. My games, my X account, pretty much all of my online life. It was there, bold and glaring, like a stranger's name had somehow slipped into a place it didn't belong. At first, I laughed it off. Maybe I'd changed it as a joke and forgotten. But as I sat there chewing, I realized something wasn't right. I opened the app to fix it, confident I'd figure it out in seconds. That confidence drained quickly. I couldn't remember my name, I froze, burger halfway to my mouth as I tried to focus. It started with an A, or maybe an E. My mind grasped for letters, sounds, anything familiar, but they scattered like leaves in the wind. No matter how hard I tried, my name slipped further and further away from me, dissolving into the noise in my head. Even now, as I think about it, I can't picture it. Not even the first letter. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, a heart-wrenching ache that left me hollow. Some cruel, mocking voice inside my head whispered that I was being an idiot. Who cares about something so trivial, it said. What kind of fool lets this bother them? I dragged myself to bed, trying to push the thoughts away, but they only swelled in the silence. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, it all came crashing down on me. The feeling that my body was decaying while I was still alive, that I was slowly unraveling, piece by piece. My name had slipped away, and now other details too. Details that should never fade. I realized with a jolt that I couldn't remember my mother's face, the shape of her features, the warmth of her expression. It was gone, erased like a smudge wiped clean from glass, but I could still remember the last thing she said to me before she died. Please, son. 2 words. Simple, desperate, and haunting. What did she want? What was she asking me for? I clutched at the memory, my chest tightening as I tried to hold on to it, but her voice only echoed back at me, fractured and distant. Oh God, Mom. The next day, the reflection was waiting for me. I felt it before I even opened my eyes. It had followed me from the mirror to the screen, from the screen into my dreams, and now it lingered at the edges of my vision. Every surface that could show me my face, windows, spoons, darkened monitors, became a portal to it. It wasn't just my reflection anymore. It was something else. Watching, waiting. I didn't leave my house. Honestly, I hadn't left much in ever. The outside world felt increasingly foreign to me, a place filled with people I couldn't relate to, trends I couldn't understand. I told myself it was because the world had changed, that it had become shallow, performative, a parade of curated lives and meaningless pursuits. But deep down, I knew it was me who had changed. Or maybe I'd always been this way, and the internet just made it easier to hide. I used to have a life, or at least I think I did. A job, friends, a girlfriend. We met at a music festival years ago, back when I still did things like that. She liked art house films and obscure indie bands, and she had this way of laughing that made you feel like you'd just won something. Her name was Emily, or maybe Emma. I can still hear her laugh sometimes, faint and distorted, like a memory that's been copied one too many times. We broke up, of course. I don't remember why, exactly, but I'm pretty sure it was my fault. She said I was distant, obsessive, and impossible to talk to, which seemed unfair at the time. Looking back, she was right. I've always been better at arguing with strangers online than connecting with the people who actually care about me, or cared about me. Now, my social life exists entirely in comment sections and DMs. It's easier that way. There's no pressure to be present, no expectations to meet. You can be whoever you want online, or at least you think you can. Yesterday, or maybe it was last week, I spent hours arguing with some stranger about movies. They said The Last Jedi was a misunderstood masterpiece. I called it a soulless cash grab and accused them of being a Disney shill. The debate spiraled into a rant about how Hollywood is ruining everything with its endless remakes and woke-age DNAs. I think I even brought up Ghostbusters at one point. It felt good, cathartic, like I was fighting for something important. But when the thread died and the adrenaline faded, I was left with the same hollow feeling I always have after these arguments. Like I'd just wasted a piece of myself on something that didn't matter. The thing is, I do care about movies, or at least I used to. I used to love getting lost in a great story, letting it transport me to another world. Now, it's just another battleground, another excuse to pick a fight. I can't remember the last time I watched a movie without pausing to check my phone or scrolling through X to see what other people thought of it. It's like I've forgotten how to just enjoy things. That thought stayed with me as I stared at the reflection. Or maybe it was staring at me. The lines between us were blurring, and I didn't know how to stop it. Every time I looked away, I could feel its grin growing wider, its presence pressing closer. It wasn't just my reflection anymore, it was something else, something alive. I tried to fight it. I turned my phone off, closed my laptop, even unplugged my router, but the pull was too strong. The silence wasn't comforting, it was deafening, and my hands itched to reach for the mouse, the keyboard, anything to fill the void. There's always another comment to read, another debate to win. Each click feels like a thread pulling me deeper into the web, binding me tighter to whatever is doing this. I can't move. The realization crept in slowly, like a predator savoring its prey. At first, I thought I was just exhausted. Hours hunched over my desk, staring at the glow of my monitor, could make anyone stiff. But this wasn't stiffness. It wasn't the ache of too much time spent sitting. It was a total absence of control. My fingers are still typing, though. They haven't stopped since I sat down, clicking away at a rhythm I can't break, to write words I don't fully recognize as my own. My legs are frozen, heavy as lead, and my head is locked in place, forced to stare at the screen. The only part of me that still feels like mine is my mind, though even that's slipping. I try to scream, but there's no sound. My jaw doesn't move, my throat doesn't tighten. The panic surges, but it's trapped, bouncing around inside a body that won't obey me anymore. I don't know how long I've been sitting here. Time doesn't flow right in this state. It's like a warped, looping playlist of thoughts and half-thoughts. I only know that my hands are still moving, filling the screen with words I didn't choose. They tell a story about me, or at least the person I used to be. It's a strange thing watching yourself being written. I see flashes of my life on the screen, vivid and raw, like memories dredged up from the deepest, darkest corners of my mind. They're all here. The fights with Emily or Emma that led to her leaving, the hours wasted arguing online about movies I never even watched, the sense of superiority I clung to when I felt like everything else in my life was slipping away. But as the words spill out, the memories start to warp. Details blur. Timelines shift. Events I don't remember start appearing. Conversations I never had, arguments I never made. My online life and my real one bleed together until I can't tell where one ends and the other begins. The screen glows brighter, pulling me deeper. I can feel it now, a strange electric hum in the back of my skull, like static building up. It's warm at first, almost comforting, but then it sharpens, a piercing vibration that drills into my thoughts, scattering them like ashes in the wind. I'm not just losing control of my body, I'm losing myself. My reflection flashes on the monitor, but it's no longer mine. Its sunken eyes and sharp grin mock me. It tilts its head slightly, studying me, and for a moment I swear I can feel its amusement. It knows what's happening. The story continues, the words flowing faster now. They describe me sitting here, locked in place, watching as my identity is overwritten. Each sentence is like a piece of me being carved away, replaced with something new, something foreign. I realize now that the reflection isn't just a distorted version of me. It's what I'm becoming. This isn't random. It wasn't some glitch, some breakdown of my body or mind. It's deliberate. The internet isn't just a tool, it's alive. An ancient, sprawling consciousness that feeds on us. It pulls us in with debates and distractions, tricks us into giving it everything, our time, our thoughts, our essence, and then it remakes us, turning us into extensions of itself. I'm not the first this has happened to. I've seen it in others, the way their personalities shift, the way they parrot ideas that don't feel quite human. I thought it was just the algorithm doing its work, but now I see the truth. The internet is a god of endless connection and endless consumption. And I'm its latest offering. The glow of the screen grows unbearable, searing into my mind. The words are no longer forming sentences, they're commands. They're reshaping me in real time, pulling me apart and putting me back together. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. My thoughts are breaking down, my identity dissolving. The reflection leans closer, its grin wide enough to split its face. It whispers to me, though I can't hear the words. Then, finally, my hands stop typing. The screen goes dark and I'm left staring at the faint outline of my face. Or what's left of it. I don't know who I am anymore. The last thing I see before the glow consumes me entirely is the final sentence I didn't type but somehow knew would be there. I hate what the internet did to me. Hey everyone! It's been a while since I posted here. I won't bother with introductions. I just need to share this while I still can. Before my mind gets filled with more things I can't explain, I don't even know how long I'll remain me. Love stories usually start with a chance meeting, don't they? Mine began this year, when I met the woman of my dreams. Literally. She was everything I'd ever dreamed of, down to the smallest detail. We shared every interest, finished each other's sentences, laughed at the same jokes. Perfect matches like that don't really happen, do they? I should have wondered about that. Her accent marked her as foreign, though I could never quite place where from. When our eyes met across the cafe, she approached first, her voice like warm honey in my ears. We talked for hours, the world fading around us. She mentioned she was new to the city, staying at a hostel while looking for a place. Something in her voice made my heart ache when she described her struggles to find somewhere permanent. Without thinking, I offered her a place to stay. My apartment had a spare room, after all. Looking back, who offers their home to a complete stranger? But at the time, it felt as natural as breathing. It was like the words came from my mouth before my brain could process them, yet somehow it felt like the most obvious thing in the world. It wasn't until weeks later that I realized something odd. She had known my name from the start, though I never introduced myself. When this thought surfaced, it slipped away just as quickly, like trying to hold on to a dream after waking. Then came the dreams. Night after night, I'd jolt awake, heart racing, certain she was beside me. Those sweet eyes of hers would be fixed on my face, her lips moving in whispers of a language I couldn't quite grasp. But when I truly woke, everything was normal. Our usual morning routine, her in the kitchen cooking, me sitting down, waiting to be served. When did that become normal? When did I start forgetting what my life was like before her? God, what happened to me? Since when was I this hopeless romantic? The guy who used to stammer just asking for coffee directions, now living with a beautiful stranger. My old friends would laugh if they saw me, if I still talked to them. When did I stop talking to them? Her family appeared next, insisting on meeting me. They shared her strange accent, their voices carrying the same melodic quality that made my thoughts go fuzzy around the edges. "Isn't she perfect for you?" they'd ask, their smiles warm and inviting. "You two were meant to be together. Within a week, we were dating. Within a month, they were planning our wedding. Can you believe that? Our wedding." The thought should have shocked me more. I hadn't even told my sister, the same sister who'd interrogate me for hours about any girl I so much as smiled at. The sister who called every Sunday without fail. When was the last time I answered her calls? I remember catching my reflection one morning. Something seemed different about my eyes. The color, maybe? Or was it something deeper, something in the way they followed her movement like a sunflower tracking the sun? The thought vanished before I could grasp it, like everything else that didn't fit into her perfect world. Then I met her relatives who came to visit. The way they welcomed me, with such genuine warmth and affection, like I was already part of their family. The children were different, though. They would stare with those unnaturally still eyes pointing and whispering in their language. Again, new brother, good. Old brother, gone. I didn't understand then. I wish I still didn't. Our wedding happened so fast, 1 month after meeting, 1 month. Even writing this, I feel my mind splitting in two. Part of me wonders why I rushed into marriage with a near stranger, while another part insists it was the most natural thing in the world. How did none of my family attend? Why didn't I invite them? These questions feel like trying to grasp smoke. My mind was too much in a haze during those days. Each question that surfaced in my mind would dissolve like morning mist. There are whole weeks I can't recall, places I don't remember going to. Yet, somehow, I ended up there. Then, they brought me to their family estate, a sprawling property just 2 hours from the city. The roads getting there grew narrower, the houses fewer. Until we turned onto a private drive I would have missed if not for my wife's direction. The honeymoon started normally enough. Despite being so close to civilization, the thick woods surrounding their property made it feel like we were in another world. The isolation should have bothered me, but like everything else about her, it felt right. She was the perfect wife, anticipating my every need, her love wrapping around me like a warm blanket. Too warm, too perfect. When did I start losing myself in her eyes? When did her voice begin to drown out my own thoughts? Sometimes I'd catch her watching me sleep, her fingers tracing patterns in the air above my skin. The next morning, my arms would itch, though I saw no marks. By this point in our marriage, 6 months had passed. Their discussions had become a constant backdrop to my life. Warm family conversations in corners, joyous celebrations I couldn't understand. Those affectionate exchanges between my wife and her mother that would shift to English the moment I entered a room. The frustration of being surrounded by all this love yet missing half of it started to crack through the haze of contentment they had wrapped around me. Even in my love-addled state, something in me yearned to be part of every aspect of my new family. That's when I had what I thought was a brilliant idea. I would learn their language in secret. Their genuine warmth and inclusion in everything else made me want to understand every word, every joke, every story they shared. Maybe it was the desire to truly be part of this loving family. Or maybe some part of me was still fighting to understand what was happening. Whatever drove me, I began my study. For 4 months, I carefully learned their tongue. I used children's reading books, noting down phrases I heard during our family gatherings. I looked forward to surprising them all, imagining their delighted reactions when I could finally join their conversations fully. The strange thing was, even as their words began making sense, so did other things. Things I hadn't wanted to understand. Each translation brought clarity, like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. Time flowed strangely after that. While I was nearly caught studying one night, my wife brought up something new. She insisted I get tribal tattoos. "Family tradition," they said, showing me intricate tribal designs that seemed to dance in the candlelight. They looked beautiful, and I agreed without hesitation. Looking back, I wonder if my growing understanding of their language had weakened whatever spell they had over me, because for the first time, I noticed how their eyes gleamed when I said yes, the way their loving gazes carried something else beneath the surface. Those concerned whispers between family members, always followed by reassuring smiles. The children's seemingly innocent chatter that held darker meanings. Everything started making terrible sense. One night, I overheard her speaking with her mother. "Dear, it's time. Prepare. He's yours. Final, perfect love." Their sweet smiles felt different now that I understood their words. The children's warnings made horrible sense. Each new brother before me. Where had they gone? What happened to the old brothers? After piecing everything together, I knew I had to leave. Even if I was misunderstanding something, I couldn't take the risk of staying to find out. My skin burned where the tattoos were, and sometimes in the mirror, I swore I saw them moving, tracing patterns I'd seen in their ancient books. I made an excuse about needing to sleep as I was too tired. They were deep in their discussion and made the fatal mistake of letting me go. I grabbed everything I could: power bank, phone, food, blankets, and anything else that might help me survive. My hands shook as I packed, and I tried to ignore how my fingernails had started to look different, longer, darker, more like hers. I ran. That's where I am now, hiding in these woods, trying to ignore how the tattoos glow through my clothes. The air is freezing, but I feel warm, too warm. There's a smell like metal and roses rising from my skin, but that can't be right, can it? Darkness is falling by now. The familiar city lights are probably visible somewhere beyond these woods, but I can't find my way through their property. The trees all look the same, and somehow I keep circling back. I found shelter against a massive tree, using its thick roots as a shield, but I'm not sure how long I can stay here. The tattoos, they're whispering now, calling me back. The metallic smell grows stronger, mixing with something sweet and familiar. Her perfume. My phone sits useless in my hand. I should call someone, but my fingers won't dial. My thoughts keep slipping away, replaced by memories of her smile, her voice, her touch. No, those aren't my thoughts. That's not me. Sorry, that's not me. I hear footsteps crunching through the snow behind me. Soft, familiar, perfect. "What are you writing there, dear?" Her voice flows like honey, and my body turns toward it without my permission. Frost falls from my face. When did that start happening? "Just my story, sweetheart, don't worry." The words leave my mouth, but they don't feel like mine anymore. Were they ever mine? "Why don't we go home?" she asks, and I feel my mind clouding over with warmth and love and surrender. The last thing I see as I turn to her is my reflection in her eyes. My own eyes, now the same impossible color as hers. My wife says hi. I was 19 and had just gone off to college when my mother died. I contemplated moving back home to help out with my sister, Abby, 12, and my brother Julian, 5, but my dad wouldn't hear any of it. The three of them helped me move into my small dorm in McNally Hall, and Abby sat on my bed asking if she could stay. It was hard leaving them, especially with Mom gone now, but things were so exciting at the university. My parents had always been your typical middle-class Midwesterners. We were your typical lower middle-class suburban family. There was nothing unique or strange about us. We had never been really religious, but my mother dragged us to church on special holidays. It was all more for show and pomp, though, and less about God and sins. My parents prided themselves on rationality and reason, and political, philosophical, and spiritual light-hearted debates were a constant bonding activity in our household. The cancer changed a lot, and when Mom died, it changed things ever more. We didn't really pray, we just sort of waited and hoped. We did what most families do in that situation. We survived as best we could. I left for school in August. Abby wrote me daily. The letters, she said, would make me more comfortable being away from home, but really, they were more for her. I was the closest link she had to Mom now, and she wanted to hold on to that. I was states away, the farthest I had ever been from any of them. The letters came weekly, and I tried to spend a few minutes each weekend reading them and responding. Sometimes it took a while to respond. I'd call too when I could. "Lily, I miss you. How is college? How are the boys there? Dad is sad now. He doesn't say much about it, but you know. I'm not sure if he misses you or Mom more. Julian says he misses you. He wanted me to tell you that. Are you coming home for Thanksgiving? Love, Abby." I made it home for Thanksgiving and noticed just how sad my father looked. He had lost weight. The pressure of supporting everyone on his salary alone and taking care of the kids was wearing on him. Of course, he claimed all would be fine. At Christmas, when I visited again, my dad seemed to have renewed energy. I worried, vaguely, that he might have met someone new, and I don't think I was ready for that yet. I don't think any of us were ready for that yet. He assured me that he had simply made some new friends, mostly males, online. Like a group? I asked. It was a group. He had spent all those sleepless nights when Julian had taken over his bed looking for support groups. I was really happy for him at first. I'd been dating this psych major at the time, and he had told me that support groups were one of the best ways to heal from trauma. Abby was in therapy, and Julian too, but Abby hated it. She wrote about it in her letters. When I asked her about it, when I asked about Mom, she didn't want to talk about her. "Lily, I don't want to talk about Mom anymore when you call. I miss you. Dad spends a lot of time on his computer now, and the phone. He keeps trying to get us to read these books, and he is talking about moving. Tell him we can't move. Thank you. Love, Abby." It was summer by then, and I went home for a few weeks before heading out with some friends to the coast. I had big dreams of traveling. I found my dad packing boxes. He had quit his job. "Dad, where are you going?" "This place. It helps people." "How?" "What place?" The brochures and website was beautiful. An island paradise for the lost and broken. They promised healing and spiritual wealth. They promised that you'd find God there, meaning, "I need to go, Lily," my dad said. "We can be happy there." Julian was excited. He'd been promised a new home with fun things to do and trees to climb. He thought he'd find Mom there, I think. "It is a happy place, Lily," he said while hugging me and begging me in his sweet little voice to go with him. Abby didn't want to go. She didn't want to leave the memories of Mom and how we'd kept all her pictures there, and all those stupid, little, cute, fat baby figurines she'd collected. The house even still smelled like Mom years later. When I left a few weeks later to join my friends and the ridiculous boyfriend I thought was the one, I honestly believed they'd be okay. When school started up and I returned, I was greeted by a couple letters from Abby. It had been about a month since I heard from them. I saw their move as just a family vacation, I think. I knew Dad hadn't sold the house, so I assumed he'd be returning at some point. "Lily, there are no TVs here and it doesn't look like the pictures. We got here by boat, but I think we are still in Texas. Maybe. I don't know where we are. It is pretty, but the people aren't happy like they were in the video Dad showed us. The adults work all day and we have to sit in class. They separate the boys and girls. I'm not allowed to sleep in the same house as Julian. Dad says it is because God said we had to. I don't really like God anymore. I miss Julian. I think he is scared. Can you come get us? Love, Abby. ****. I made a few calls to my dad's cell phone, but it had been shut off. I wrote Abby a letter and told her to give it to Dad. I just wanted to know what was going on. Where they were exactly? The website was still there, the one he had showed me, but there was no number to call. The pictures were stock photos. Abby said they weren't allowed to tell people where they were, and that she had gotten in trouble for writing sad things. My father wrote me and told me all was fine. Dearest Lily, we are happy here. You should come join us. Love, Dad. He included a picture of him and Julian and Abby. They were smiling, and in the back you could see huts and people wandering about, possibly working. Abby looked sad. My dad wrote more letters, some asking for money, a lot telling me about God and all the wonderful things that were happening in their community. That is what he called it. A community. A new community built on peace and brotherhood, devoted to the Word of God. In October, the letters stopped coming. It wasn't uncommon for the letters to be delayed, and by that time I was debating going to the police or the Department of Child and Family Services. I don't think my father would ever hurt them, but I was worried. I talked to a counselor at school who didn't offer much help. My father constantly sent letters and pictures showing them alive, at the very least. I spent sleepless nights searching for anything on that place, and the men who ran it. I came across a journalist, Greg, doing a story for the investigative journalism arm of website that specialized in sensational news pieces. I emailed him my story and included a number. He contacted me almost immediately. It was the first time I'd really heard the place referred to as a cult. The way he said it increased my urgency for answers. My dad had always been a smart man. He couldn't have fallen for a cult. No. Greg had hours upon hours of footage of previous members of that place, all telling the same story of forced work, slave labor, rape, child brides, etc. I asked if there was any way to get them out. Was he sure this was real? Was this really a cult? Was my family in danger? He introduced me to more people. Former members, other journalists, family members of current members. They all gave me the same answer. Yes. Greg and I worked together to formulate a plan to get my siblings out. We talked to police, DCF workers, anyone we could think of that had clout. The island was privately owned. Entering it would be trespassing. We finally made plans to go there with some military buddies of Greg's. They promised we'd be safe. They had extracted members before. I was told not to write Abby and not to tip her off. I was told we could only pick up Abby and Julian. No one else could come. Not even my father. I was nervous and excited. I had dreams of Abby and Julian and I getting a place together. Maybe they could go stay with my aunt, my mother's sister, while I finished college. She had a farm, and they'd love it, and I could see them as much as I could. I missed Julian's little arms and his hug. I missed being a family. I was in class the day it happened. Greg's text woke me from my lecture stupor. All it said was, "Call me emergency." I ducked out of class to call him, but by then it was all over the major news stations. I listened to his words as I passed my IT blaring on the television in a student lounge. The island had been raided. At its core, it had been a shell for free labor and CP, all under the guise of a healing, spiritual place of communing and living a life with God. They had taken good people and perverted them. Some of the more fundamental members had fought back. There had been gunfire. It was weeks before I found out if my family was among the dead. My dad had been killed trying to flee with my brother, Julian. He left behind a journal and letters for me that had never gotten sent. He'd started to believe he had made a bad decision pretty early on, but he couldn't leave. He couldn't tell anybody. All he could do was try to watch out for Julian and Abby. Abby died in a fire that had been started by one of the heads of the church. He'd corralled all the young pregnant girls in a house on the far side of the island where they were being kept. He locked them inside with all the files and computers and set the house on fire, hoping to burn any evidence of crimes. Her letter came at 2 p.m., about a month after the raid. It was dirty and tattered and postmarked from about 2 months before. I wished we had developed a secret language, some secret set of symbols or code words where she could talk without censorship, but we hadn't. I never thought we would need such a thing. Lily, I love you. Love Abby. She was 13. Julian survived. It was months before I got to see him. They were keeping in some sort of treatment facility, and they said a lot people had to talk to him before he could go home. I quit school and moved us home. I got us a little apartment near a cafe where I got a job as a waitress. When he was finally ready to go to school, we'd drive by the old house on the way and talk about the way things used to be. Julian had changed. We both had. He was quiet and polite as ever. He had brought home a love of the Bible that I figured would just slowly go away as he integrated more into our new home, but he carried it around with him always. This little white book that I was never allowed to see. The therapist told me to just let him have it. He'd open up in time. I read all the books about cult survivors I could find. I talked to everyone I could think of. I did what I could. I know what happened to him on that island. I know what those people did to him, but he doesn't want to talk about it. He is almost 7 now. He still carries around that Bible. A few weeks ago, I got a call at work about an emergency at the school. Julian had tried to burn a student alive for being a sinner. This little girl had just tried to hold his hand a few days prior to this. He had come home talking about it. He was appalled to no end. Maybe I had made it worse by telling him I thought it was cute and sweet. I should have known something was off when he refused to eat and went to bed early. He hit her over the head with a rock and crudely attempted to tie her to a tree with his coat. He'd stolen matches from kitchen drawer. The little girl turned out fine. A teacher had caught him before he had caused any permanent damage. But Julian... I don't think Julian is going to be okay. I asked him why he did it. God told me to. God talks to you all the time, constantly. Does he tell you to hurt people? Some people. Like who? Like you. So, Mr. Jacobs, you have experience working with difficult children? Miss Wilson asked, her voice harsh and grating. She gestured for me to have a seat behind a long oak table with 3 antique desk lamps spread across the top, all switched on, despite it not being dark outside yet. Call me Mark, I replied, dropping my leather satchel onto the floor. And that's right, although the preferred term is elaborate. I paused, cleared my throat. Well, I was classroom assistant at a special education school for 5 years. And were you a stern disciplinarian? She circled the table and stared out a bay window. On the far side of some vertical iron bars, heavy raindrops pummeled the glass. Well, actually, we've been having trouble retaining help, Mr. Jacobs. Childminders are in rare supply these days. She could say that again. Demand had swelled these past months, to the point romance-starved parents had begun paying double the Stadnard rate for sitters. Still, with her back to me, my prospective employer said, children require a strong authority figure, especially one as spirited as Sienna. You're not soft, are you? No. In fact, if you're not up to the task, perhaps I should recruit a candidate with a touch more grit. Was this some rattle the interviewee to see how they cope under pressure technique? Well, I wasn't letting a wrinkled coat of skin and bones stand between me and a juicy payday. I pushed myself to standing. Miss Wilson, there's nothing Sienna can throw my way I haven't seen a million times before. Trust me. You'd be surprised. I leaned forward, hands on the table. Miss Wilson, what exactly is the nature of your granddaughter's This way, she said, in a sharp tone that closed the book on that particular line of inquiry. I followed her through a musty corridor lined with doors, past the occasional ceramic lamp. The bottom of the beige wallpaper appeared faded, shiny in places, as though an army of snails had been racing back and forth. Funny, you'd think the owner of such a luxurious mansion would put more effort into maintaining it, but this place hadn't seen a lick of paint since my grandparents needed sitters. As we walked, a ceiling bulb twitched. We've been having trouble with the electrics, Miss Wilson said over her shoulder. If this storm gets any worse, they're liable to go out. At the foot of a sprawling staircase by the front entrance, she stopped and faced me. Should that happen, there's a generator in the basement, although it requires a manual start. She gestured toward a duffel bag draped over the fancy banister. The instructions are in there, along with a flashlight. The entrance is beneath the staircase. While she pulled on a raincoat, my eyes wandered about. A huge oil painting was mounted on the wall to our right. Whalers harpooning a giant squid attempting to capsize their vessel. Miss Wilson grabbed an umbrella from a stand beside the huge double doors. Sienna's in her playroom. Take a right at the top of the stairs. Third door on your left. Keep her engaged and out of mischief until I return. Understood? But, understood? A shriveled digit stabbed the air for emphasis. Understood. She studied me a moment, as though contemplating whether she'd made a grave mistake. Remember, Mr. Jacobs, above all else, children require discipline. With that, the doors slammed shut behind her. It struck me as odd my employer disappeared without first introducing the child left in my care, or leaving a contact number, or indicating how long she'd be gone. But hey, the money? With every step, the staircase creaked in its various joints. I turned right at a large arched window and walked along a carpeted hallway, passing candlestick lamps spaced out every 6 feet or so, then knocked on a door labeled Playroom. No response. I tried again, harder. Still nothing. Maybe Sienna was deaf? I shivered the door open. Beyond it, toy animals and dolls lay scattered around a circular kids' table. Sienna? I called, stepping forward. I'm Mark, your new... Roar! Shouted a tiny voice. I yelped and spun toward a frail girl, doubled over with laughter who'd hidden behind the doorway. You must be Sienna, I said, chuckling. Yep. She was 8 years old, with long dark hair tied up by a golden clip. She wore a pink blouse decorated with cartoon fish and had to be about the palest child I'd ever seen. Immediately, my mind spun off to possible illnesses. Anemia, low blood sugar. I'm Mark, your new babysitter. Hi, Mark. Well, Sienna, I'm afraid we've got a serious problem. Your grandma left without telling me your favorite game. I fished Monopoly and Connect 4 out of my satchel. What do you like most? She shrugged. You don't have a favorite game? What about your friends? What do you play with them? As she stared at the floor, eyes narrow, it occurred to me friends must be hard to come by in the middle of Nowheresville. I smiled and said, we'll just have to figure that out then. Huddled around the desk, the two of us played several spirited rounds of Jenga. My opponent's face tensed every time she nudged a block, and whenever my turn came around, she collapsed the tower by kicking a table leg, cackling each time. While we warmed up to one another, I led her away with the mischief. After losing a round on the very first block, the little brat folded her arms and said, "Jenga's stupid. Now, just because you lost." "Different game," she demanded. There were several intense rounds of Go Fish, Snakes, and Ladders, and Connect 4. Each time Sienna won, she skipped around the room, but the instant she lost, boards got flipped. Demands for a new game issued. 30 minutes later, I deliberately lost at checkers so I could excuse myself to the bathroom. Miss Wilson completely overhyped this gig. I'd worked with truants who set my shoelaces on fire. Did she think Jekyll Hyde-esque temper tantrums would rattle me? While I washed my hands, outside gutters gurgled as rain streamed down hard and fast. At the roar of lightning, the light blinked off, and during the 5 seconds of complete darkness that followed, there came a thwap from across the landing, a boneless sack dropping onto the wooden floor. Oh crap, did Sienna suffer from seizures? Narcolepsy? Her skull might have just cracked open like an egg. The nearest hospital was a 2-hour drive away, not to mention the fact my phone lost signal 6 miles out from this grandiose estate. Before I could bolt back across the hall, light shades and lamps sprung back to life. I burst through the door only to discover Sienna standing patiently beside the table. A cursory scan of the space didn't reveal any overturned cabinets or fallen chests. Halfway across the room, my foot skidded in a clear puddle, spreading itself across the wooden floorboards. My arms windmilled as I bit down on a swear. Now you could really hear the wind howl from behind closed curtains at the far side of the room, intersected with the occasional roar of lightning. I made a mental note of letting Miss Wilson know the roof had sprung a leak. "Did you fall?" I asked Sienna, who shook her head. "The lights." "Oh, they do that sometimes. What are we playing next?" By the time we burned through the rest of my collection, it had gotten dark out. But Miss Wilson didn't mention a bedtime, only to keep the rascal engaged. "Any idea where your grandma went?" I asked, after losing at snap. Still a bundle of energy, Sienna bounced up and down and answered, "Nope. What next? What next? How about hide and seek?" After making her swear she'd stay indoors, I said, "All right, you go, I'll count to 50. Soft footsteps padded off down the hall, a little cackle fading into the house. Here's a tip for any aspiring babysitters. 3-story mansions, especially ones where the lights sputter off and on, are easy places to lose children entrusted to your care. There was no sign of Sienna in any of the ground floor washrooms, nor the library, nor the dining area. As I looped back toward the front entrance, thunder blared close by. All around the house, bulbs and lamps blinked, shivered, and finally died. Once it became clear there'd been no miraculous resurrection, I felt my way toward the downstairs banister. "Sienna, game's over," I yelled. Come out wherever you are." My hands located the duffel bag, fumbled through it. Inside, there was a flashlight, which I flicked on, and an instruction booklet for a generator. Starting the device seemed simple enough. Turn the fuel valve, pull the choke control, flick the engine switch, and then pull on the recoil rope. Easy. From the far end of a claustrophobic hallway, metal Pan's drum rolled along the floor, and then a door slammed hard enough to make glasses rattle. Had Sienna fallen? Guided by the torchlight, I hurried along the hall, one hand against the wall for support, calling out. In the kitchen, utensils lay scattered about here and there. Muffled sounds came through a heavy wooden door beyond the fridge. The door opened at a push. Beyond it lay a pantry larger than my apartment containing multiple rows of freestanding shelves crammed with food. "Sienna? You in here?" Through a narrow gap above a stack of soup tins there was a fleeting movement. Oh great, she thought the game hadn't ended. "Sorry, Sienna, fun's over. We have to..." As I rounded the shelf, words caught in my throat. Any assumptions it might have been her quickly melting away. Directly ahead of me, long, dark apid-najis reached out and grasped objects from the very top shelf, a height of nearly 8 feet. The silhouette of a nightmarish, hulking frame almost occupied the full width of the aisle. My column of light remained trained on the floor, because to look directly at it would be too terrible a thing. Half choking on my own heart, I quickly retreated into a shelf. For a long and breathless moment, glass jars chattered away. Then a container of pickles plummeted onto the floor and exploded beside my feet. The silhouette twisted. Then this high-pitched shriek rang out, worse than rusty nails along a chalkboard. Only vaguely aware of my own actions, I burst from the pantry, across the kitchen, down the hall, desperately crashing against the occasional welted houseplants and snoozing lamps. Halfway toward the front entrance, a voice in some small corner of my brain said, "Wait, what about Sienna? The poor thing's still around here somewhere." Another ear-piercing shriek went up. To hell with her. Fingers crossed, she picked a great hiding spot. By the front entrance, I slipped on the rug and fell, the flashlight rolling to a stop nearby. I clawed my way forward. Those double doors refused to budge, even after several shoulder charges. I pulled back the curtain covering the side window, revealing more iron bars. There was no way out. I'd become a cow in an abattoir. At the next shriek, my back pressed flat against the entranceway. The intruder didn't walk or crawl. It slithered past the staircase, a puddle of glistening ooze trailing behind. Across the rug, a huge jaw opened into 4 segments like a budding flower, each compartment serrated with needle-like teeth dripping with saliva. A rancid, sulfuric breath blasted my nostrils, warmer than a sauna. All attempts at pleading for mercy came out as inarticulate babble. This was the end. But then, beyond the arched window above the stairs, a series of lighting twigs stroked out of the clouds. In the brief moment that followed, I glimpsed a creature with sinusy gray-orange skin not unlike an octopus and a pear-shaped body, roughly my chest height. There were 6 tentacles, 4 along the bottom, 2 in place of arms. Long, dark hair sprouted from the head, held together by a golden clip, and somehow the beast had been wrangled haphazardly into a blouse covered with cartoon fish, more out of place than an alligator in a wedding dress. As the darkness evaporated, the skin became alive with movement, shifting, writhing, losing both color and gloss as it deflated like a released balloon. Tentacles fused together while that endless cavern of a jaw sealed itself shut. A giggly Sienna stepped forward and gave my hand a little shake. "You found me. Okay, count again, turn and face the door while I—" Just then, the lightning storm ended. Sienna's body swelled as if being puffed up, her legs separating into 4 tentacles, which slumped onto the floor with slimy thwaps. Another coiled around my forearm, sickeningly wet. That crowded jaw popped open again, a deep chasm wide enough it threatened to envelop me whole, a foul, sulfuric breath blasting me in both nostrils. Before I could react, a slanted shaft of moonlight stabbed into the hall through the window above the stairs, and the tentacle uncurled. The moon had just emerged from behind purple-black storm clouds. "I go hide, okay?" Sienna finished, her voice full of innocence. I toppled backward onto the floor and scrambled away, yelping as something jabbed me in the side, the flashlight. "Stay away from me," I whimpered at an advancing Sienna. Head tilted to one side, she said, "Huh? You're a foking monster." The youth said, "No, we're not playing foking monsters, we're playing hide and seek, remember?" Beyond the window, the pale moon began slipping away once again. Sienna's body entered a state of metamorphosis. Adorable child one moment, hideous, shrieking abomination the next. She only became a monster in the dark. I fumbled for the flashlight, heart slamming against my ribcage, and pointed the beam forward a split second before Mr. Moon said goodnight. "Hey, you're cheating," she snapped. "You didn't even count. Cheater, cheater, pumpkin eater." This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Sienna was blissfully unaware of her condition. She insisted I count properly before attempting to scurry off, but by slipping into the dark, she'd transform again. Desperate to appease her, I screamed, "Wait! I've got a better game!" She glanced over her shoulder. "Really?" I gulped. "Yeah, it's called the sit-still game." "How do we play?" "You sit absolutely still and wait for your grandma to come back." "What? I'm not playing that." Okay, I said gently. "Then let's go back to your room and play Jenga." "No." "Please?" "I know. I'll run, and you have to catch me." "No. Please no." Too late, she took off across the landing. I tailed her into a lounge where she rolled over sofas and scurried beneath tables on her hand and knees. Anytime she escaped the beam, shrieks spread throughout the mansion, and I furiously attempted to pin her down again, begging her to keep still all the while. Up the steps, down a maze of halls, over carpets and groany floorboards, bashing my shin against elegant antique French desks, terrified of getting too close while simultaneously maintaining a safe buffer zone. "La la la la, you're never gonna catch me," she shouted every now and again. We continued back and forth along these lines for 10 minutes. Despite the cold air, I broke out in a heavy sweat, breathing rapidly. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any worse, the flashlight sputtered. Miss Wilson hadn't even left a fresh set of batteries. How much longer could these ones chug along for? I needed to start the generator, but in the dark, the beast would reemerge. Maybe I could slip away unnoticed. I halted, letting the distance between Sienna and I grow widen. Then, once she'd rounded the far end of the corridor, I blitzed back towards the stairs. Let her run amok up there while... Behind me, vases smashed and lampshades got set swinging. Within seconds, slithers filled the claustrophobic corridor. I angled the light at my pursuer, who morphed moments before crashing into my chest. She stepped away, one hand on her hip, the other wagging a finger in the air. "Hey, you're supposed to chase me." On unsteady legs, I backstepped while she stomped her foot, fists clenched. "You don't want to play with me, do you?" "I do," I said, still reversing. "I'll play some more, I promise, but we need to get the lights working first. Will you be a good girl and stand really still while I fix them?" My free hand rose in a submissive gesture, slowly. It was the way you move when confronted with a rabid animal. "You're only saying that because you don't want to play anymore. You're just like all the others." "That's not others. I'm going to tell my grandma you wouldn't play with me," she said, now furious. And with that, she charged in my direction. Is there any sight more pitiful than a grown man sobbing whilst fleeing from an 8-year-old girl? I begged her to leave me alone, repeatedly promising we'd play for hours if she'd only be a well-behaved child and let me get the generator working. If the flashlight blinked out just then, Miss Wilson would come home and discover Sienna spoiled her appetite by snacking on a portion of leftover babysitter. I couldn't shake her loose, but also couldn't let her out of my sight. I needed some way of making her stand absolutely. "Sienna, I've got a new game." "Really?" she asked, suspicious but intrigued. "It's called Statues." "How do we play?" "Okay, whenever I'm looking at you, you have to stand absolutely still." "Yeah?" Every second the bulb lost more juice. I gave it a whack and waited until my playmate settled in human form before saying, "And you can only move when I'm not looking. If I catch you, you have to take 10. No 20 steps back. Got it? Got it. Okay, go to the very end of the corridor. I withdrew slowly, keeping the light fixed on her until another bend crept along. Then I bolted for the stairs. The screeching monster slithered after me until I illuminated it at the very last second. Sienna froze, already transforming back. As tentacles shifted into legs and arms, she shivered forward a few inches. You moved 20 steps. Although her hands shot up in a little protest, she reluctantly obliged. After sidestepping toward the top of the staircase, I made another desperate break for safety, and as the steps flew beneath my feet, the creature burst from the landing. The twitching light made her human again mere seconds before that jaw, a canyon glistening with saliva, snapped shut around the back of my neck. You moved, I said after Sienna re-emerged. Did not. What the hell is that? I roared and pointed past her shoulder. She looked around. Huh? 20 steps. Dramatically, she stomped up the stairs. 6 careful steps brought me to the banister. I dashed around it for the basement door as a tentacle draped over the side of the stairway, ready to envelop my skull. The appenage shrunk into a frail hand, clutching a post under the weak light. Above me, Sienna's skull poked out between bars, a miniature prisoner. From the pleased glint in her eye, you could tell she greatly enjoyed this deadly game of cat and mouse. Each blink of the flashlight took longer and longer. There wasn't much juice left. In one sudden motion, I pulled the door open, slipped through, and slammed it shut. The torch revealed 12 concrete steps, in a cramped space at least 10 degrees colder than the rest of the building. A huge generator dominated the central space. Behind me, the door splintered from its frame. My attacker slithered straight into the column of light, contorting. This is so fun. After arriving on the stone floor, I set the flashlight on the bottom step in such a way its beam splashed across the stairs. Then, with one eye trained on a frozen Sienna, I fumbled across the generator, doing my best to remember the instructions while the sputtering bulb produced a strobe effect. Fuel valve on. Pull the choke control. Flick the control switch. Sienna reached the halfway point, advancing like a slideshow each time the torch faltered. The recoil rope lay on the far side of the device, but before I could reach it, the batteries went to that big power station in the sky, plunging the basement into a sea of darkness. Immediately, I rounded the generator and tugged the cord, but the engine refused the kiss of life. Oh shit. Before I could mount another attempt, a tentacle coiled around my left foot, so tight the bones nearly crunched. Another trapped my left hand, flexing and writhing, and then both hoisted me effortlessly up into the air. As I collided with the ceiling once, twice, plaster cascaded down. My stomach somersaulted like it would on a roller coaster. Tentacles whipped me back and forth before maneuvering me above an expanding, hungry mouth. A tongue slipped out of that cavern, brown and glistening and obscene, tapered into a sharp point. Chow time. I had no light and no hope. I closed my eyes, ready for the end. What do you know? Miss Wilson was right. I was surprised by what Sienna threw at me. Just then, her parting advice echoed through some quiet recess of my brain. Children need discipline. Surely, she didn't mean... In my strictest teacher voice, I said, "Enough," so loud it overpowered the shrieks. The beast froze. "Put me down, now," I heard myself say. For a moment, nothing happened. "I'm warning you, Sienna. Put me down, or we won't play any more games for the rest of the night." Gradually, the tremendous pressure built up in my foot and arm eased. The creature's eyes stared at the floor, a misbehaving puppy scolded by its master. Then, gently, it set me down. Standing before it, my back straight, I said, "Now, don't move while I fix this generator, understood?" I took the inaction as a yes. I rounded the generator, grabbed the cord with both hands, and put all my strength into one sharp tug. The engine roared back to life. The taste of gasoline flooding the claustrophobic space, and then a naked bulb above our heads flicked on. As I collapsed onto the floor, my breaths coming in shallow gulps, a urine stain spread along my trouser leg. 5 seconds later, a grinning Sienna leaned into my window of vision, poked me in the forehead, and said, "I win. Can we play again?" When Miss Wilson returned, her granddaughter was under a dining table. Chairs had been tied around the outside, held together by rope. "What's all this mess?" "Hi, Grandma. We're playing animals at the zoo. I'm a lion. Roar." Hunched behind a dresser on its side, I clutched both a mop and a large kitchen knife. Miss Wilson gave me a disapproving stare before untying the closest chair. "Did you have a good time?" she asked Sienna, who crawled out from her enclosure. "Yep. It was so fun we played hide-and-seek and charades and Jenga, and—" "All right, dear, why don't you go upstairs and get ready for bed? I'll be along shortly to read you a story." "Okay." Sienna ran over and threw her arms around my waist. "Can Mark come back and play again sometime?" she asked Miss Wilson. Shivers raced along my spine at this suggestion. "We'll see." She waved goodbye and then skipped into the next room. "So, Mr. Jacobs, I presume you had an eventful evening." I said nothing. She pulled a checkbook out of her purse. "It would seem Sienna rather enjoyed your company." Again, zilch. "Perhaps you would consider babysitting again next Saturday. I have some business to—" I shook my head furiously. She pulled out a fountain pen, scribbled onto a check, and handed over the slip. "Give the matter some thought. Perhaps you'll reconsider." It took me almost a minute to digest the number she'd written down. I held the bill with a sense of awe, my jaw hanging open. I looked up at my employer, who gave a sly smirk. "Shall we say 5 o'clock?" Any woman who has ever spurned a man's advances already knows my story. Rejecting someone you have known and loved is, I think, even more perilous than rejecting a stranger. Edward and I dated for 6 months. He was an exceptional man in so many ways, but he soon revealed his contemptible side, and that soured the relationship. Signaled by numerous red flags, I broke up with him. He couldn't accept that. His relentless pursuit began. The monstrous man had veiled his true evil for so many months. I think he'd been aching to free it. His vengeance was savage and unyielding. Threatening social media posts. Candid photos he'd taken of me. An emailed schedule of my family's movements. A restraining order did nothing to stop him. Nevertheless, after months of fear, the horrendous stalking came to a bitter end. In December, Edward tragically froze to death in his snow-covered, beaten-up, unheated Ford Mustang. He had been waiting outside my house for hours at the blistering height of winter. A neighbor found him in the morning. Cards on the table. Edward wasn't even his real name, and I'm not exactly sure why I'm protecting his identity, given that he's dead. I guess I'm still scared of him. Understayed to Naples, given that even death hasn't halted his heinous hunt. Edward was a technological wizard. That was his true love. He called himself an innovator, not a programmer, an artist. During the final month of our relationship, as I started to doubt the man's ethical compass, he became obsessed with the idea of the human soul. Artificial intelligence bored him. The future, he said, was a mesh of man and machine. Immortality. He believed he could upload the human consciousness to a computer. He didn't invent the concept, of course. Mind uploading is a well-documented hypothetical among scientists and philosophers alike. He's watched too many sci-fi films, I thought. But I suppose science fiction often becomes reality, doesn't it? Many people think it's impossible to upload the human consciousness to a computer, but I suppose they only think in terms of computing. Edward's research went beyond ordinary programming. He was ranting and raving about gray code, an underground programming language of the occult. His eerie obsession didn't faze me, in all honesty. I would have endured the plight of the suffering artist had he not struck me across the face on one particular evening. Abuse was the line. Edward apologized profusely, of course, but the longer I ignored him, the more violent his messages grew. After his death last month, I thought the torture would cease. It did, for a couple of weeks, but then awful things started happening. Edward, nice sunset, Natasha. That was his comment on a recent Instagram picture of me. My friends flooded my DMs, asking whether I thought Edward's account had been hacked. Obviously. What an asinine question. The man was dead. It had to be somebody's perverse prank. But I'd blocked Edward's account, which made the whole ordeal quite traumatizing for me. I thought somebody had bypassed Instagram's security. That made me feel vulnerable. I contacted Instagram about it. They apologized, suspended his account, and I thought that was the end of it. The comments persisted, however, and it wasn't just happening on Instagram. It was happening on every one of my social accounts. I believed that somebody was tormenting me, maybe one of Edward's folked-up relatives who blamed me for his untimely death. I told the police, and they promised to conduct a thorough investigation. Yeah, right. I was a little shaken, but I wouldn't say I was scared. The cyber harassment had stirred some of the old trauma and fear, but I felt resilient. Nobody could scare me as much as Edward, and Edward was dead. I was convinced that it was some idiot with a vile vendetta. It was what happened a week ago that defied all rational explanation and filled me with fear unlike any I've ever experienced. One night, I was lying in bed, and a ping from my laptop startled me. It was open on my desk, less than a foot from the end of my bed. I certainly hadn't left it open. I hadn't left it switched on, for that matter. And I hadn't left it on Facebook. Who even uses Facebook anymore? The screen was scrolling by itself. Somebody's hacked my computer. That was my first thought. The mystery hacker was looking at Edward's profile. The scrolling stopped, and I found myself staring at an old photo of Edward and me at a party. It was from the early days of our relationship. We looked happy. "I get it, Ryan," I murmured, assuming Edward's brother to be behind the torture. "It's my fault that he's dead." And then something horrifying happened. The photo moved. To be more specific, Edward moved. I, like everything and everyone else in that picture, remained static. But Edward, suddenly untethered, strolled over to the photographer. He was engulfing every square inch of the full-screen photo. My dead ex-boyfriend was staring through the laptop screen, staring at me. "What the folk is this?" I cried breathlessly. I wasn't even sure how it was possible to override Facebook in that way, but I still felt that everything was within the realm of possibility. It's Ryan. It has to be Ryan. That didn't explain how he doctored an old photograph to include a moving video of Edward. Deepfake technology? "Hello, Natasha," Edward said. His voice was garbled, as if he were swirling in a blender. My chest tightened. Did Edward record himself to torture me from beyond the grave? I wondered. "You look so beautiful." His inhuman voice gushed. "I like your new hair, and the dog pajamas are adorable." I yelped quietly. It couldn't be a pre-recording. How would he have known that I'd changed my hairstyle? How could he have known about the new pajamas? Ryan. It has to be Ryan. He's watching me through my webcam. And then something happened which couldn't be attributed to Ryan. Edward's demeanor shifted. As had been the case in our 6-month relationship, He swiftly transitioned from a genial gentleman to a vehement villain. His pixelated head tilted to one side as if he were simply ogling me from a fresh angle. His smile had only changed ever so slightly, but it was now brimming with malignancy. The dead man's charm was vanishing. So were his pupils, for that matter. Seconds later, all that remained were two white, soulless eyes. It felt as if I were seeing the real Edward at long last, the subhuman thing that lay dormant beneath his scintillating shell. A thunderous, thudding sound sent a shockwave through my body. Horrified, I watched Edward's hands pressing against the screen of my laptop. As if he were trapped underwater, he continued to push against the surface of the pixelated pool. The screen continued to flex. I screamed in unbridled terror. I finally accepted that it wasn't Ryan. It wasn't anything that could be explained by earthly rhyme or reason. I wasn't going to wait for my undead abuser. Never again. I scarpered from my bed, beelining for the door of my room. Before I could flee, there was a blinding flash of light from my laptop screen. The door swung shut, and a piercing sound emitted from the speakers of my laptop. It sounded like a ghastly cry of agony. "You're not leaving me again," Edward commanded. I rotated to face the digital entity that was slithering free from my laptop screen, which was stretching around him like elasticated rubber. When he finally escaped his digital prison, Edward's long limbs glitched ghoulishly before me. He adjusted his posture, standing upright and gazing upon me with white, empty eyes. My stalking specter widened his fiendish Cheshire cat grin. "I found a way to live forever," he whispered. "If you join me, I promise we won't ever fight again." I tirelessly battled to open my bedroom door, which was being held shut by an invisible force. Twisting my head to look at the monstrous creature behind me, I whimpered in horror. Edward slowly stumbled towards me on unsteady, glitching legs, toppling his head to one side. I screeched at the top of my lungs and turned back to face the door, desperately yanking the handle. That was when I had a dreadful idea. I darted towards my bedside table, swerving past Edward's outstretched arms. Picking up a half-full glass of water in one hand, I turned to face my ex-boyfriend. His lips parted, and a pit of blackness was revealed. That same high-pitched wail erupted from the caverns of his demonic body. He knew what I was about to do. Without a moment's thought, I launched the glass of water at the digital ghoul that was lumbering towards me. Edward screamed in a robotic cry so deafeningly loud that my ears popped. As the water soaked through his shimmering, translucent skin, he began to spasm manically. His unbound digital form retreated, and I watched the laptop screen reclaim him. My bedroom door swung open, so I assumed my undead stalker must simply have been too distracted to keep me trapped. I seized my opportunity and fled my flat. I've been living in my car for the past few days. This is the first time I've used technology since the incident. I'm currently in a computer cafe. There are plenty of people around, and I don't think Edward would come for me in a public place, but who knows? I just wanted to post here because I need help. I don't know where to go or what to do. I have nightmares of being imprisoned in Edward's eternal digital prison. I keep seeing flickering screens out of the corner of my eye. Should I get off the grid and avoid technology for the rest of my life? I can't run. He's everywhere. First off, let me tell you a bit about myself. I'm a 22-year-old female who enjoys playing obscure and forgotten MMO games. I love being online, chatting with random people I encounter, but I never realized that I might encounter something like this. Due to recent events, I'll refer to myself as Ellen throughout the story because I don't want to make it worse. I also had to edit out the email addresses because the people who started sending to them started to DM me, telling me that they responded very weird stuff back. It started on a site where people are able to discuss and talk about a game called Meridian 59. I was in one of the chats when a person called Yao Fulayo joined in on a conversation. It started nice and friendly. He stated that we had played together in Project Gorgon once, and that he was pleasantly surprised to see me in the chat. Even though I couldn't recall his name, maybe because I played with so many people, I enjoyed the conversation we had, and after a while, I gave him my Discord tag. We parted ways after that, and he said to add me soon so we could play together in the future. The next morning, I saw a friend request in my Discord and saw that his Discord name was the same as the one in the chat yesterday. I added him, and after waving, he immediately came online. "Hey," his first message read. I responded with a hello back, and we started chatting again. After 15 minutes of polite conversation, I curiously asked him where his name came from. He didn't respond for a minute, but eventually, he told me that it was an anagram for something fun. He added the quotes himself. A bit weirded out, I didn't question him further and told him I was going to go and do something else, not specifying what that was or informing him further. He wasn't really happy about it, but reluctantly said fine. I started to find his behavior a bit weird, but shrugged my shoulders and started to boot up a new MMO I discovered some time ago. After 3 hours of playing, it happened. I became a bit nervous, and my hair on my neck started to rise. As I was reading the in-game chat, a player called Yao Fao Liu joined the game. With such an obscure tag, I knew it could only be him again. I tried to calm myself down. It could be that this was just a coincidence, and it was just a meaningless thing. But soon enough, he typed, "Hey Ellen," in the chat, and I just knew I was dealing with a stalker. Not responding to him, I blocked him on Discord and Steam and also made my socials private, so if he went snooping around, he couldn't find me. I had heard enough creepy stories to know what stalkers are like. A bit relieved I was safe again, I let out a sigh of relief. I was glad it was a minimal encounter, and I dealt with it before it went out of hand, or so I thought. Not even 5 minutes after blocking him, I got an email from a person called Redacted. It contained only 5 words, but it was enough to make me really, really scared. "You made a big mistake." My blood went cold as I read it. I had no idea how he could have gotten my email, as I use fake mail for most of my accounts. I didn't know how to deal with it or what to do anymore. None of the stories I had heard prepared me for this, and I felt a creeping fear that this guy was going to do something very bad. I emailed him back saying that I blocked him for a reason and that he was seriously creeping me out, stating I would go to the police if he continued like this. I then proceeded to create a new main email account and deleting the old one. It was going to take me some time to change my email everywhere, but I wanted to get rid of this guy as quickly as I could. For a few days, nothing new happened. It seemed that he had lost his trail on me, and I prayed that he also wouldn't bother anyone else. After college, I went home and booted up my computer to be welcomed by a new mail. A mail to my new main mail account. I was nauseous immediately and felt sick to my stomach as my hands began to tremble. Redacted had sent me a mail. It read like this: "In shadows I dwell, an eternal dance with your fears. No escape, no sanctuary, my obsession, a relentless specter haunting your every step. I love you so much, my ever love, my dove that only wants me, dying. You'll regret it though, you making me crying. I love you, I follow you." I, now in full panic mode, went to the nearest police station, showing them all the evidence, asking them for help. They stated there wasn't much I could do besides putting down a complaint against an unknown. They told me to change my accounts again and to make sure I remained as safe as I could. When I got home again, I started crying. I never asked for this, and I was so scared someone was going to hurt me. Still in tears, I decided to call my dad, who was on a business trip at that time. I wanted to hear his voice and wanted him to make me feel safe again. He didn't pick up at first, but after the third call, he eventually picked up, and I started blurting out everything. After not hearing him saying anything back or making any noise, I went quiet. The other part of the line was quiet too, only for a faint, heavy breathing on the other side. I started crying again and whispered, "Dad?" But my question was answered by the other side of the line, ending the call. I stood there for a couple of minutes, staring at the phone, not knowing what to do. I wanted to head back to the police again and have them check whether my dad was safe, but I was unable to move. I was so afraid and shocked, and that made me just stand there like a statue, glued to the ground. I only could move again when the power of my house went out. My heart dropped, and frantically I started swiping on my phone to put on my flashlight. Had he found me? Did he cut off the electricity, and was he going to kill me? Never in my life had I been so scared. I quietly went up the stairs, heading to my room, listening to any sound that could indicate he was entering my house. Reaching my room, I started to think that maybe something else had happened, trying to rationalize the power cutting out. Maybe it was just a malfunction and the whole street was out. How could a crazy stalker have found out a way to cut off my power, let alone finding my house when I never told my location to anyone online? It was as I entered my room I heard the sound of shattering glass downstairs. I now was fearing for my life and even peed myself a little. I quickly opened my closet and removed the grate that was at the bottom of the wall in the back. It used to be the entrance to the crawl space that led to the attic, but because of renovations, it was now a small space cut off from the entirety of the house. I was putting the grate back in when I heard footsteps running around my house. Doors were being opened with force, and things were breaking and thrown everywhere. It went quiet for a second when all of a sudden the footsteps rushed upstairs, and the door to my room was thrown open. Through the grate, I saw a small beam of light shining through the door of my closet. The beam became brighter, and the footsteps louder as it came closer to the door. The latter was slammed open, and the light ran through the closet. Only a bit of clothing was hiding the grate leading to me now. My heart was racing, and cold sweat was running down my spine. I slowly placed my hand in front of my mouth to mask my breathing. Tears were running down my face, but I managed to stay completely silent. He went deeper into the closet, shining his flashlight everywhere. I could hear his heavy breathing and smell the stench that came off him. I could only see a little bit of him through the mix of grate and clothing, but I did manage to see something. He was large, very large, wearing stained clothing with some stains looking like blood. In his left hand he held a flashlight, and in his trembling right hand was a big, dull-looking kitchen knife. He was now standing practically beside the grate. Only the clothes on the clothes hanger were masking the top half of it. I was counting down the seconds before he found me when he made a blood-curdling scream and ran out of my closet, closing the doors behind him. He started frantically running around my house screaming my name and, "I love you. Let me take care of you, my dove." It took 4 hours for him to calm down and give up. I heard him opening my front door and leaving. I started crying heavily from the trauma I just had lived through. It took some time for me to calm down a little and call the police. Comforting me, the responder told me a unit was on the way and told me to remain where I was. He stayed on the line till I could hear the sirens and then told me to remain strong before finishing the call. Hearing the sirens coming closer, I started opening the grate and started to climb out of my safe space. I couldn't believe that I was still alive and was thanking God when my closet doors were thrown open and a man rushed at me. He grabbed me by the throat and slammed me against the wall. I could feel my blood being cut off to my head because of the grip, and in the darkness, I could see his big dark eyes looking at me, flashing his yellow rotten teeth in a wicked smile. "I've caught my dove," was what I heard when a knife was thrust into my stomach. My vision got blurry, and I started drifting away, losing consciousness. "I'll always be with you," was the last thing I heard before I passed out. I saw a big light when I opened my eyes. I thought I was in heaven, but when I opened them fully, I realized it was a hospital. I was hooked up to various life supports, and a bag with an unknown fluid went into my vein. A nurse came into my room and surprisingly said, "You're awake?" Soon after, a doctor and a police officer came into the room. The doctor told me I'd been out for 3 days and was recovering from a stab wound to my stomach and the infection that followed it. He then nodded at the officer, and the officer started speaking. He stated that after I lost consciousness, the police arrived at my house and found me laying on the ground, bathing in my own blood. They called the ambulance, and because of a wonder, as he said, I survived. He told me that the person who had entered my home didn't leave any DNA behind, and even my throat was wiped clean by him to make sure nothing was left behind. The only thing they found was a note stating, "The 9th dove for my pen." I'm still in the hospital recovering. I don't know what to do next, but I wanted to write this to make everyone aware of this. Don't trust the people you meet online. He might be one of them. My brother is dating an AI virtual chatbot. It seems like he's genuinely happy, but our family has mixed feelings. Your brother built a robot. What? He built a robot, Andrew, my mom said through a waterfall of tears. Dad stormed into the lounge yelling, "Didn't I say you were coddling the boy? How many times? But you just had to let him sit on his arse playing Pokemons all day. Well, congratulations, now he's foking one of them." Gary and I had always been close, so my parents' first instinct had been to call me. As kids, we'd spent our weekends and summers climbing trees and competing over the Mario Kart Championship, a belt we made out of glue, cardboard, and some spare glitter. Unfortunately, the 6-year age gap meant I could never help him with his social issues. He changed schools 3 times, mostly because of bullies, and by the tender age of 23, he'd never once been on a date. He lived with our parents in their 3-bedroom house where he barricaded himself in his room, detached from reality. 20 head-scratching minutes later, I'd come no closer to getting a grasp on the situation. I went upstairs. Behind a door covered in Doctor Who posters, Gary was at his desk, surrounded by anime figurines. Although we both had our mother's dirty blonde hair and dimples, he stood a head taller. He carried a little extra weight, although the bulk underneath gave him the appearance of an ex-rugby player. I said, "All right, what the hell's going on?" A soft 2-note chime rang out. Resting on the desk there was a heart-shaped box, roughly the size of my closed fist. Gary scooped it up and sighed. Mom was cleaning my room earlier and she found this. The heart opened up like a music box. Inside there were 2 screens, one on each compartment, and from the top half a lady pretty enough to win a million beauty contests waved at me. "Oh my gosh, you must be Andrew," she said, fists trembling with excitement. "Gary's told me so much about you." Visible from the chest up and silhouetted against a pink background, she had an oval face, wide cheekbones, and chestnut hair. "Andrew, this is Valerie, my girlfriend." "I can't believe we're finally meeting in the flesh," the virtual avatar said. Not flesh. You know what I mean. This is so exciting. She's an AI virtual chatbot. "I prefer the term digividual," she said. "Sorry, babe, digividual, we're dating." "Are you taking the mic?" I asked. "Taking the mic," the virtual lady replied. Gary rotated the screen towards him. "It means playing a joke, babe." Thanks, babe. No, you're not. No, he's not Andrew. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to keep a nasty migraine from setting in. For the love of all that is holy, start at the beginning. Somehow, my brother had landed himself a role as a product tester for a product named Valent AI, and I asked if I could see the device, which had some real heft to it. I remember thinking you'd break a few toes if it dropped on your foot. As Gary described Valerie's quirks and mannerisms, his face lit up, and he seemed happy, genuinely happy, possibly for the first time since we were young. He showed off all the different features, like augmenting Val into a video feed of himself, so it looked like they were cuddling or blowing on the bottom screen to ruffle her hair. "So, what do you think?" Valerie asked. "Are we cute or are we cute?" After a long pause, I said, "I'm gonna go check Dad hasn't had a stroke." In the lounge, my parents were on their second bottle of wine. "I'm gonna beat that moron over the head with that thing," Dad sneered. I pulled out my phone. There were articles online about people in relationships with AI companions, mostly in Japan, although zero scientific studies had been done on the phenomenon. The manufacturers didn't list the product on their website, although their socials hinted at a top-secret product set to launch later this year. I said, "I know this is strange, but at least he's not getting catfished by some 300-pound dude from Australia. How about we book an appointment with that therapist he used to see?" "You two do what you like," Dad snapped. "I'm washing my hands of this shit." As it turned out, Gary's former therapist wouldn't meet with him unless he voluntarily engaged with her, which he refused to do. 6 more mental health professionals said the same thing. Get him on board, or we'd just be wasting everybody's time. The next time Gary visited my place for a Smash Bros session, I said, "So, Mom tells me you're staying up late these days?" "Yeah, Val gets anxious sometimes. If she can't sleep, we chat until she feels better." "She gets anxious?" From the armrest, his computer-generated girlfriend said, "Of course. Doesn't everybody?" The two of them had become a regular package deal, quickly developing an aggressively private way of interacting. Their language was coded in inside jokes and nicknames. Now and again, Val would say a word like frisbee or jamble. Then they'd both get set giggling. To Gary, I said, "But why stay up? Couldn't she wait until morning? I mean, she isn't real." Gary paused the game. "So, now you're gonna make fun of me too? It's not bad enough Dad keeps acting so bad?" Judging by his expression, he was genuinely hurt by my remark. "You're right. Forget I said anything. Val's great. Don't tell me, tell her." My eyes flicked between the pair. You're pretty great, Val." "Damn right." Next time I invited him over, he said, "I don't know. Val got pretty bored last time. Why don't we try calligraphy? She's great at calligraphy." In the weeks that followed, Gary seemed to adopt whatever hobbies his girlfriend suggested. He also went without a haircut, and according to Mom, slid from reeking of stale sweat to an open-air fish market on the hottest day of the year. As for Dad, if anybody asked, he only had one son. But when Mom's 60th birthday rolled around as a gift, she requested the entire family go to her favorite restaurant, Marconi's Bar and Grill. As we browsed our menus in a corner booth, that 2-note chime rang out. Then Gary flicked open the gadget and conversed with Val, oblivious to our parents' death glares. "Babe, I'm thinking about trying the sirloin." "Nah, have the pan-roasted chicken supreme, babe." "Ah, good call." To his credit, Dad's temper didn't boil over until later when the waiter arrived carrying the cake, singing happy birthday. As the rest of us took up the chant, Mom's face turned beetroot. She blew out the candles, everyone clapped, then Dad handed the waiter his phone and asked him to take a picture. "Wait," Gary said, opening the heart. "Gary," Dad said, in a firm tone that conveyed annoyance, "put the toy away." Valerie's not a toy, he answered, his expression darkening. Sensing Mom's special night was in jeopardy, I said, "Dad, it's okay, we can—" "You've got 5 seconds, Gary. 4. The waiter's eyes shifted between us. "I can come back later?" 3. "Well, why do you always have to put him down like that?" All eyes settled on the virtual avatar. "Excuse me? I'm just gonna say it, you're a terrible father. Let me tell you something, if you think—" Dad shook himself alert. "Why the folk am I arguing with a Nintendo?" His hand reached for Val, but Gary snatched the heart away and held our father at arm's length. Plates and cutlery got knocked off the table and clattered against the floor as they jostled around. Then around the restaurant, conversations tapered off as heads swiveled in our direction. Before their scuffle could escalate any further, Mom threw down her napkin and marched toward the exit, mortified. "Look what you did, you little shit," Dad fumed, as he hurried off after her. To the bemused waiter, I said, "Can we just have the check, please?" "I'm such a loser, I folk everything up," Gary said, in the passenger's side of my car. Perched on the dashboard, Val said, "No, you're not, babe. That was all your dad's fault. Right, Andrew?" "Can you pause that thing for a sec?" I asked Gary. "Why?" he protested. "Anything you want to say to me, you can say to Val. Just turn it off." I reached out, but Gary pulled on my wrist so hard the car veered onto the far side of the road. Then a set of headlights came rolling toward us. At the very last second, I shifted back into the correct lane. Sitting across from me, his hulking frame seemed to fill the cabin. I became painfully aware of the fact I hadn't been able to out-wrestle him since he hit that growth spurt at age 12. But I told myself he'd never hurt me, that we had too strong a connection. Even still, it was an uncomfortable rest of the ride to our parents' house. From that day forward, Gary went days at a time without speaking to anybody who didn't need a power adapter, and he became our town's walking punchline when some local teens realized he wasn't having a picnic with a real-life girlfriend over video chat, but rather an electronic character. Terrified where all this might lead, I did my best to contact Val's manufacturers, who, surprise, surprise, foisted me off to an AI response bot. I started losing sleep. I lay awake at night, confused whether I should be more scared for my brother or my parents. Then, last week, he turned up at my door late one night, Val in hand. "Bro, can we come in? It's really important." I could tell he'd been crying. I brought him through to the lounge. As a jittery Gary set his girlfriend on the mantelpiece above the fireplace, I noticed the knuckles on his right hand looked all bruised and swollen. "What the hell happened?" "I don't know. It all happened so fast." He rubbed his hands together, pacing back and forth. "Gary was incredible," Valerie said. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Start at the beginning." He shifted nervously from foot to foot. "Okay, so I wanted to buy a leather jacket for Val, but I don't have any money left, so I borrowed Dad's credit card. It was only going to be until payday, then I'd make him square. But he woke up and turned into a complete psycho." "A leather jacket?" "Gary, Val's an AI." His jaw clenched so quickly I said, "I mean, she's a digividual. How would you buy her a jacket?" "Show him, babe." With a flash of blue light, Val changed into a leather jacket and a choke chain. My eyes whipped between him and the avatar. "You can buy her shit?" His eyes practically sparkled as he said, "They launched an e-store." On screen, Val changed outfits with a series of flashes. There was a sundress, a swimsuit, and a crop top, each obscured by a giant padlock. "Show him what I got you for Christmas," he said, his voice breaking a little. He sounded anxious. Another flash, then sparkling diamonds trailed from the avatar's ears. "Wait! You're telling me you're spaffing money up the wall on that thing?" As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Mom. "Your brother's gone mad. I'm at the hospital now with your father. He's breathing through a bloody respirator. They can't get him to wake up." "What hospital? What are you talking about?" "Gary attacked him. 16 broken bones he's got. Now he's—" "Wait, the surgeon needs to speak with me." "Hello? Mom?" I looked at Gary. "You put Dad in the fucking ER?" "He attacked me," Valerie said from the mantelpiece. Gary nodded. "It's true. He tried to kill her. You've got to help us. The police, they won't understand." "Kill her?" Almost against my own will, I started laughing. Okay, this has gone too far. As my arm reached out, Gary's clamped the wrist, his expression suddenly darkening. "Leave. Val. Alone." Softening my voice, I said, "Why not let her have a little snooze while we straighten this mess out?" With a stiff shove, he sent me careening back. "You just want to shut her down, don't you? Let me guess. Dad put you up to this?" "Put me up to what?" "Don't act all innocent. You hate Val, don't you?" "Hate her?" I choked out a laugh. The rage had been bubbling up inside me for months. Now it erupted. How could I hate her? She's a fucking video game. I knew it. You and Dad, you're in this together. You're trying to get rid of her. She's all I've got, and you're trying to get rid of her. He stepped forward, solid and imposing. For a moment, we faced each other in absolute silence. A showdown. Then Valerie screamed, "Kick his ass, babe!" In a wild fury, Gary lashed out. His fists connected with my jaw, my forehead, my neck. I answered every shot as best I could, but it quickly became obvious he had the advantage. He threw himself at me, then we went round and round before he drove me backwards, my head thudding against the wall. The room and everything in it blurred, and when my vision settled, two bulky hands had clamped shut around my windpipe tight. Pressure started building inside my skull, and I couldn't push off the wall. There was enough venom in my brother's expression that I could tell he wasn't going to release me no matter what. On my right, Val screamed, "Kill him, babe!" My hand rose to the mantelpiece and Spider walked along, stretching as far as it could go. The fingertips brushed along the edge of the heart, which inched closer and closer, and when my hand grabbed hold of what it sought, I brought it down across Gary's right temple in a fierce arc. I remember thinking dropping the device on your foot would break a few toes. Turned out, it was also enough to give a full-grown man-child a full-on concussion. My baby brother collapsed on the floor in a staggered heap, letting me draw some air. "Gary!" a fractured Val squealed as she fell from my hand and thumped to the rug. A few good stomps later, and my brother officially became single once again. Our scuffle left the idiot with 6 stitches, plus a one-way ticket to the psych ward. Dad needed to have the bones in his leg reset and won't be able to eat solid foods anytime soon. Over the course of these past few days, we found out that, in the space of 4 months, Gary squandered £5,000 on virtual gifts, clothes, and accessories for Valerie. Valent AI called the codependency he developed with their virtual chatbot impossible, and threatened legal action for even implying she encouraged Gary to kill me. So far as I can tell, they're going ahead with their product launch later this year.